Beaumont Park, in the parish of Stow-on-the-Wold, Gloucestershire, the cool, clear, pale blue Saturday morning of September 11th, 1819, written by my own hand at the South Library writing table in the soft Cotswold autumn light coming through the south window. To Miss Penelope Hartshorn, only surviving daughter of my late dear second cousin, Mrs. Theodosia Hartshorn, née Verney of the parsonage at Stow-on-the-Wold. My dear young lady, it is the privilege of an old man of 71 years, lately come to the close of a long autumnal decline, that Dr. Hartwell of Cheltenham has been kind enough to set out in plain country terms, to write at last the letter he has been writing in his own quiet for a long 12-month past. I have not, in your 23 years of life, come over to the parsonage at Stow to make my acquaintance with you, my dear. The fault is entirely my own. Your dear late mother was the cousin of my warm regard from the summer of 1781, when she came up to Beaumont as a young girl of 7 on her father's particular wish. She was the small candle of the Verney family I had then. We corresponded irregularly through the 1790s and the early years of the 1800s. Her death in the winter of 1808 was a sorrow I had no proper means to put into words to her widower, the Reverend Peregrine Hartshorn. Your father, who I had heard at the parish post, was a good and gentle man. I have followed your 23 years from the parish post, these years past, my dear. I am pleased to write that I leave you, by the will Mr. Henry Sandys of Lincoln's Inn has lately drawn up at this house, the dwelling house called Beaumont Park, with its home park and home farm, being together 263 acres in the parish of Stow-on-the-Wold, the contents of the South Library being 312 volumes, the Verney family plate of 96 pieces, and the further sum of £4,600 in the 3% consolidated annuities at the Bank of England. I ask no kindness of you in return. I ask only that you think of Beaumont as your own, and of your mother's old Verney cousin, who has at last had the small courage to tell you so. Crispin Verney, written this Saturday morning at the South Library at Beaumont Park. The letter was laid open upon the green baize at the parsonage parlour writing table at Stow-on-the-Wold at 3:30 on the cool, clear, pale yellow Tuesday afternoon of the 30th of November in the year 1819. The seal had been broken at the gold wax, Mr. Verney's own quiet personal seal, kept distinct from his official seal of business, a small pressed cluster of honeysuckle in the soft, warm Cotswold register that his late mother had given him at his coming of age. The covering professional note from Mr. Henry Sandys of Lincoln's Inn, sealed in the customary red Lincoln's Inn wax and folded twice at its short brief, was set at the right hand of the writing table beneath the small pewter weight. Miss Penelope Hartshorn sat gentle upright at the parlour writing table in warm, careful Cotswold composure, soft chestnut-brown hair pinned smooth at the nape, warm hazel eyes very direct, the colour of a Cotswold beech at the autumn close, in the plum and cream half-morning gown, with the clean white linen collar her late father had liked her to wear at the parlour hour. She had read the sealed letter from Beaumont Park through once at 3 o'clock, and had set it open before her at the green baize. She had read it a second time at 3:30, and had not yet moved from the writing table. She was 23 years old. She had been born in the month of March, in the spring of 1796, at the parsonage of Stow-on-the-Wold, in the county of Gloucestershire, the only surviving daughter of the Reverend Peregrine Hartshorn, curate of St. Edward's, and his young wife, Theodosia née Verney. And she had buried her mother of a winter chill at 12 years old in the December of 1808, and her father of a low spring fever at 21 in the May of 1817, and had since the spring of 1818 kept on at the parsonage as the present incumbent Reverend Coverdale's lodger at the customary parish rent, giving the pianoforte and the small French to the daughters of 2 of the Cotswold farming families that lay above the village. the Wentworth girls at the home farm at Moggersbury, and the Tregony girls at the home farm at Lower Swell, at the customary Tuesday and Friday hour, and at the customary fee. She read the gold-sealed letter from her mother's elder cousin through once more, gentle and warm and careful at each line, and laid it open again upon the baize. The covering professional note from Mr. Sandys, broken at the red wax at the same hour of 3 o'clock, set the matter out at its brief Lincoln's Inn manner. Mr. Crispin Verney of Beaumont Park, second cousin to Penelope's late mother, had died on Sunday the 14th of November of a long autumnal decline at 71. The will of the 18th of August last had been signed at Beaumont Park, witnessed by Mrs. Aubrey, the housekeeper of 32 years' standing, and by the Reverend Coverdale of the parish of Stow. Probate had been granted at Doctors' Commons on Thursday the 25th of November. Mr. Sandys, as sole executor, requested Miss Hartshorn's attendance at his chambers at No. 5 Old Square, Lincoln's Inn, at 10:30 of the morning of Wednesday the 8th of December, to hear the will read and to receive the keys of Beaumont Park and the steward's books at the hand of its lately settled heiress. The note closed with the customary expression of regret for the occasion, and the warm, careful hope that Miss Hartshorn should find the late Mr. Verney's settled wishes met at her own willing hand. Penelope read Mr. Sandys's note through a second time at 4. The clock on the parlour mantel struck the half-hour at 4:30. She read the Verney letter again, slow and gentle and full at each warm, careful sentence, and at the close of the second reading, she held the letter against her breastbone for one warm, careful moment, and then set it gentle upon the green baize. She did not weep. She drew one mild, even breath at the parlour writing-table at the cool Cotswold November afternoon, and turned her warm hazel eyes upon the leaded west window, where the pale yellow afternoon was beginning its first slow tilt toward dusk over the Cotswold Honeystone village. She had not known him. She had been kept at the parsonage from her 7th year onward, by a father who held his cures and his small parish duties at a careful Cotswold pattern, and her late mother Theodosia had spoken of the elder Verney cousin only in the briefest gracious manner. A man of 57 at her own death of 1808, a man at his own gate, a quiet good man at Beaumont, the head of what remained of the Verney line. Penelope had supposed, at 12 and at 15 and at 20, that the cousin at Beaumont Park had simply chosen not to come over. She had not, in her young womanhood, supposed that he had at the same hour been writing letters in his own quiet at the South Library writing-table that he had never sent. She rose from the writing-table at 4:45, and laid the Verney letter folded once upon the small mahogany table beside the parlour fire. The covering note from Lincoln's Inn she kept open beneath her hand. The parsonage parlour was warm at the sea-coal fire Mrs. Coverdale had made up at 3. Penelope walked the parlour to the leaded west window and back, gentle and warm and careful at each step, and stood one moment at the mantel with her warm hazel eyes upon the small framed silhouette of her late mother that her father had hung at the chimney-breast in the autumn of 1808. The Reverend Inigo Coverdale came down to the parsonage parlour at the chime of 5. He was 54, curate of St. Edward's at Stow-on-the-Wold, and the present incumbent of the parsonage in which Penelope's own father had served before him. Soft, sandy grey hair, finely thinning, warm blue-grey eyes behind small gold-rimmed spectacles, weathered fair Cotswold skin, long, kind, clean-shaven face, in his plain black cassock with the white linen surplice still at his collar from the afternoon service of the parish school. He had been at the parish school at the Lane's Bottom till the chime of 5 and was come in for his customary parlour tea. "Miss Hartshorn," he said, in the warm clerical kindness that was his settled register. I had heard at the post that a Lincoln's Inn note was come down to the parsonage. "It is here, sir," Penelope said, gentle and warm, careful. And another with it, from Mr. Verney's own hand at Beaumont, sealed at his quiet gold wax. I should be glad if you would read both. The Reverend Coverdale set his spectacles a little further up the bridge of his nose, took the open Verney letter in his right hand and the Lincoln's Inn note in his left, and stood one moment at the parlour fire to read. Penelope sat at the writing table opposite and watched him read, her warm hazel eyes mild and equable at the parlour. The clock on the mantel kept its small Cotswold tick at the silent room. Mrs. Coverdale at the kitchen across the passage was laying the parlour tea. The curate read the Verney letter through once with his warm blue-grey eyes, very gentle at each line, and the Lincoln's Inn note through once after. He folded the note again at its 3 creases and laid it at the small mahogany table at his right. "My dear young lady," he said at last, in warm clerical kindness. I had known Mr. Crispin Verney by sight at the autumn Cotswold shoot above Stow in the September of 1812. Your dear late father took me up to it at the kindness of the Tregony farm, and we saw Mr. Verney at his own south gate at Beaumont. He spoke at that hour to your late father gentle and warm, and to me at no great length. I had thought him then, and I think him now at the reading of this letter, a quiet good man at his own gate. I am very glad his settled wish has reached you at last." "Thank you, sir," Penelope said, in mild, equable Cotswold composure. I had supposed he had simply chosen not to come over. I had not known. He had chosen, by what this letter says, only to write what he could not bring himself to speak at the door of a stranger, said the Reverend Coverdale, with warm care. "It is a kindness, done at the last hour, my dear, but it is a kindness." He returned the Verney letter to her gentle, warm hand, and stood at the mantel one moment more. "I shall hold the parsonage parlour for you on Wednesday at your return from London," he said, in warm clerical kindness. "If you should wish to come straight in at the south door from the Stow coach and sit at this fire 1 hour before you go up to your room, I shall be at the parlour or at the parish school, and Mrs. Coverdale shall have the kettle at the hob. You are not to think that you go down to Lincoln's Inn alone, Miss Hartshorn." "Thank you, sir," Penelope said. "I am very sensible of your kindness." Mrs. Coverdale brought in the parlour tea at 5:10. The two of them sat at the parlour writing table and took the warm Cotswold tea in mild, equable composure. The Reverend Coverdale spoke at the parlour service of the parish school of the morning, and of the upland congregation of Sunday last, and not again of the Verney letter at the Green Bays. Penelope was sensible at her warm, careful teacup of the great kindness of being let, for 1 parlour hour, to keep the gold-sealed letter to herself. She was sensible, too, at the gentle, warm tick of the parlour clock, of how careful the Reverend Coverdale had been at his reading of the letter, and his reading of her face. He had read the Verney letter as a kind man reads the kind hand of another kind man at a long, mild distance, without surprise at its warmth, and without comment at its omissions. He had let her, by the gracious courtesy of his settled register, keep her own counsel at her own breastbone. Penelope, who had not yet, at 23, been the subject of any great kindness she had not earned at her late father's pulpit or her late mother's pianoforte, drew one warm, careful breath at her teacup and laid her hand at the Cotswold honeystone saucer in mild, equable gratitude. In the 4 days that followed, Penelope set her small affairs in order at gentle, warm Cotswold composure. On the Wednesday evening of the 1st of December, she wrote to Mr. Henry Sandys at No. 5, Old Square, Lincoln's Inn, confirming her attendance at his chambers at 10:30 of the morning of Wednesday the 8th, and accepting at her own thanks the customary chambers hour. The letter went down by the parish post at the chime of 9 of the Thursday morning. On the Thursday afternoon, she wrote to Mrs. Wentworth at the Moggersbury Farm and to Mrs. Tregony at the Lower Swell Farm, giving the customary 6-week notice that she should not be at liberty to continue the pianoforte and the small French at the customary Tuesday and Friday hour, expressing her warm, careful regret at the close of so settled an arrangement, and offering at her own kindness to recommend to each family the music mistress at the Stowe Village School as her honest successor. The 2 notes went down by the Friday morning post. On the Saturday afternoon of the 4th of December, she wrote to her late father's only sister, Mrs. Sarah Hartshorn, widow at Cheltenham at 56, and her only near relation by blood, acquainting her with the matter at the gentle, warm Cotswold register of an aunt who had been good to her since the spring of 1817. The letter to Cheltenham she gave to the parish post at the same hour. She did not anticipate her aunt's reply before the Wednesday of her London journey. Sunday the 5th of December, the morning service at St. Edward's by the Reverend Coverdale, at the parish hour of 10:30. Penelope walked the short lane from the parsonage south door to the church south porch in her plum half-mourning, at her customary Sunday pace, and took her customary place at the parsonage pew. The Reverend Coverdale preached from the gospel lesson at his usual warm clerical kindness. The parish did not yet know of the Verney letter, or of Lincoln's Inn, or of Beaumont Park. Penelope kept the matter at her own gentle, warm Cotswold composure, beneath the plum and cream gown and the clean white linen collar. On the Monday afternoon of the 6th of December, she walked the Stowe lanes for the half-hour, as her settled custom of a Monday had been since the spring of 1818. The warm, pale yellow Cotswold December afternoon lay soft over the Honeystone village. The small upland sheep were folded at the lane's far edge. The leafless beeches at the south slope above Stowe caught the slow gold of the 4 o'clock sun. She walked at her gentle, warm Cotswold pace and let herself think. She thought, at the lane's south edge, where the Cotswold Honeystone wall ran low between the upland fields, of her late mother Theodosia, at 7 years old, at Beaumont Park, in the summer of 1781. The girl of 7, the Verney cousin's letter had named at his own warm, careful italic, the candle of the Verney family, who had come up to Beaumont at her father's particular wish, who had walked the home park of 263 acres at the elder cousin's gentle hand, 24 years before her own birth. She thought of the candle of the Verney family the cousin had carried in his quiet for 38 years after that summer. She thought of the South Library writing table at Beaumont, and of the unsent letters that must, at the gentle, warm honesty of the September letter at her parlour table, lie folded at some careful drawer of the South Library still. And she thought, very gentle and warm and careful at the lane's south edge under the pale yellow Cotswold light, of what it might be to walk that home park as her own, to put her own warm, careful hand to the south door of the Honeystone country house her mother had walked at 7 years old, and to walk the upland sheep pasture above the Eve Valley at the warm, careful pace she had walked the parsonage lanes these 21 years. She thought, too, of her mother's hand. She had been 12 at her mother's death, and a great part of what she retained at 23 was the warm, tender weight of that hand at her own shoulder on Sunday mornings at the parsonage pew, and the gracious manner in which her mother had cut up the small Christmas oranges for her at the parlour table on the Christmas Eve before the winter chill of 1808 carried her off. The gentleman who had written the gold-sealed letter at his South Library writing table at Beaumont had, by his own kind italic, known her mother as a girl of 7 at his own gate. He had known a part of her mother that Penelope herself had not been alive to know. The warm, careful thought rested at her at the lane's edge for a long, mild moment under the pale yellow Cotswold December light. She turned her warm hazel eyes to the leafless beeches at the south slope above Stowe, and let the thought settle gentle at her breastbone, and was sensible at her own heart of one tender, warm Cotswold ache she had not anticipated at her morning rising. She did not let herself think any farther than the south door. She turned at the lane's elbow and walked back to the parsonage at her gentle, warm Cotswold pace, and was at the south door at 4:15. On the Tuesday morning of the 7th of December, she put her 2 small leather trunks in order at the parsonage's south chamber. One for the 4 days at London, the cream half-morning gown for Chambers, 2 warm, careful Cotswold under-petticoats, the small Verney mourning brooch her late mother had given her at her 10th birthday, 2 warm, careful pairs of indoor shoes, the parsonage prayer book, and one for the longer Cotswold journey on after, her music, the pianoforte primer of Mr. Kramer that she had given the Wentworth girls and the small Tregony girls, her late mother's cloth-bound French exercises, the 18 volumes of warm, careful sermons her late father had marked at his own gentle hand, the gold-sealed Verney letter folded in clean tissue at the dressing case, and the Lincoln's Inn note in its red wax beside it. She corded the 2 trunks at the South Hall with the worn leather straps her father had used for his own Stowe journeys, and asked the parish postboy to be at the south door at 5:30 of the Wednesday morning. At 6 on the Tuesday evening of the 7th of December, Mrs. Coverdale lit the parlour fire at the leaded west window for her, and Penelope sat down at the parlour writing table in gentle, warm Cotswold composure. The 2 corded trunks stood in the south hall. The gold-sealed Verney letter was folded in clean tissue at the dressing case at the smaller trunk. The Lincoln's Inn note in its red wax was folded at her right hand at the writing table. The cool, clear, pale yellow Cotswold night was come down beyond the leaded west window over the Honeystone village. The Cotswold beeches at the south slope above Stowe stood leafless and gentle at the slow blue dusk. The small upland sheep were folded at the upper lane. Penelope laid her warm, careful hand at the green baize and looked through the leaded west window at the pale yellow Cotswold November dusk fading into a soft Cotswold December night. The morning, by the customary postboy at 5:30 of the Wednesday and the Stowe stage at 6, and the long Aldersgate road through Banbury and Stony Stratford after should take her to No. 5 Old Square, Lincoln's Inn, and to Mr. Henry Sandys's chambers there at 10:30 of the Wednesday morning of the 8th of December, 1819, and to the will of her mother's elder cousin, Mr. Crispin Verney of Beaumont Park. She let her warm hazel eyes rest one mild moment at the silhouette of her late mother at the chimney-breast, and at the gentle gold of the sea-coal fire that Mrs. Coverdale had banked at the leaded west window. She had lived these years past at the parsonage, and at these lanes at the gracious patience of a parish that had been kind to her late father, and she had not, until the gold-sealed letter, supposed her hour at Stowe should ever come to a close. She thought of Beaumont Park, 23 miles north over the upland Cotswold lanes, in its warm Honeystone quiet at the same Cotswold night, and of the South Library writing table, at which her mother's elder cousin had written his September letter at his own kind italic. She did not yet know the rooms or the south door or the upland sheep pasture. She should know them by the gentle, warm Cotswold order of the next 10 days, soon enough. She did not weep at the leaded west window. She drew one gentle, warm, even breath at the parlour writing table, and laid her warm, careful hand once more at the green baize, and was in gentle, warm Cotswold composure at the parsonage parlour at 6 o'clock of the Tuesday evening of the 7th of December, with the gold-sealed Verney letter folded safe at the dressing-case in the South Hall trunk, and the parish postboy ordered for 5:30 of the morning. The cool, clear, pale yellow Wednesday morning of the 8th of December. 1819 came up over Carey Street at 8:30, soft and gentle at the London chimney-pots. Mrs. Bromhead's lodging house, where Penelope and her aunt, Mrs. Sarah Hartshorn, had been put up the evening before at the close of their post-chaise from Cheltenham, kept a parlour at the front and a breakfast room at the back, and at 9:30 the two of them sat at the breakfast room window in warm, careful Cotswold composure at the chocolate pot. Mrs. Sarah Hartshorn was 56, lately come over from her Cheltenham widowhood to keep Penelope company for the London week, soft iron-grey hair beneath a fine lace cap, warm hazel eyes very direct, the Hartshorn hazel, slender 5'5" upright, in her soft amber silk half-mourning gown with the white lace fichu her late husband had liked her in. "You shall walk it, my dear, in 20 minutes at the gentle pace," she said at the toast, in mild, equable kindness. "It is no more than the half-mile by Chancery Lane. You shall be at Mr. Sandys's door at 10:25, which is the warm, careful margin a young lady ought to keep at her first London chambers hour." "I shall, aunt," said Penelope, gentle and warm careful at her cup, "and I shall come back by 12 at the latest." "Mrs. Bromhead shall keep the fire up," said Mrs. Hartshorn. "I shall be at this window with my needlework. You are not to hurry on my account, my dear. It is your morning, and you shall take it at your own gentle pace." Penelope laid her hand at her aunt's wrist, one warm, careful moment, then rose from the breakfast table and went up to put on her plum and cream pelisse and her cream Cotswold bonnet. She came down again at 10:10, drew on her gloves at the hall mirror, and bid her aunt good morning at the parlour door. Mrs. Bromhead, at the kitchen passage, curtsied her out at the front step with a gentle warm word, and Penelope went down the 3 worn stone steps to Carey Street at 10:20. The walk to Lincoln's Inn took her along the pavement by Chancery Lane in the soft, pale yellow London morning, the warm gold of the winter sun catching the upper windows of the chambers opposite and the cool blue shadow of the lower courts at her feet. She walked at the gentle, careful pace her aunt had set her, gentle, upright, in warm, careful Cotswold composure, the soft chestnut-brown hair beneath her cream bonnet pinned smooth at the nape. The bells of St. Clement Danes struck the half-hour as she passed beneath the gatehouse of Lincoln's Inn into Old Square, and the cool gold of the winter morning warmed at her cheek. Number 5. Old Square stood at the south side of the court, 4 stories of warm brick with a plain black-painted door and a brass plate that read, "Sandys and So, Solicitors." Penelope laid her gloved hand at the plate one warm, careful moment, drew one mild, even breath, and rang the bell. The chambers clerk, a thin young man in plain black, took her pelisse at the outer room and showed her through into Mr. Sandys's inner room at the back. The room was warm at a sea-coal fire in a black iron grate, lined floor to ceiling with the calf-bound reports of a 25-year practice, with one tall sash window giving onto the cool, pale yellow morning over the chamber's garden. The green baize writing table stood at the centre, set out with 2 foolscap folios, a brass-cornered black tin box, a pewter standish, and a ribbon-tied bundle in the customary Lincoln's Inn red tape. Mr. Henry Sandys rose from his chair at her entrance and came round the table to meet her. He was 57, thinning silver-grey hair carefully combed back, kind grey eyes behind gold-rimmed spectacles, fair indoor pallor at the cheek, a long, warm scholar's face, clean-shaven, thin 5'11" upright with a slight stoop at the shoulder, in his plain black superfine with a clean white cravat and a mourning band of black silk at the left sleeve. He inclined to her at the door in the gracious manner of a solicitor who had not, in 25 years at the Cotswold and London circuit, lost the warm, careful courtesy his late father had set him at his admission to the rolls. "Miss Hartshorn," he said in kind grey gravity, "you are very welcome at these chambers, my dear young lady. Pray sit at the green baize chair. The morning is cool, but the fire is up. Mr. Sandys, said Penelope, gentle and warm, careful. "I am very sensible of your kindness, and of the great trouble you have lately taken at my late mother's cousin's hand. Pray let us proceed at your own gentle pace." Mr. Sandys handed her gentle into the green baize chair opposite his own, drew the larger foolscap folio toward him, and laid his thin scholar's hand at the ribboned tape. "The will, my dear," he said gentle, "was executed at the South Library writing table at Beaumont Park on the Wednesday morning of the 18th of August last, in my own presence and the presence of Mrs. Cassandra Aubrey the housekeeper and the Reverend Inigo Coverdale, the curate of Stow. Mr. Verney had been my client at this chambers since the spring of 1808. I shall read you, by his particular wish, only the bequest paragraph and the witness line. The trust clauses I shall set out at narration, that you may take the morning at your own gentle pace." He drew the foolscap toward the green baize, set his gold-rimmed spectacles a little further up the bridge of his nose, and read in the gentle, clerkly voice he had kept these many years at the Cotswold and London circuit. "I, Crispin Verney of Beaumont Park, in the parish of Stow-on-the-Wold in the county of Gloucestershire, gentlemen, do hereby give devise and bequeath unto Miss Penelope Hartshorn, only surviving daughter of my late second cousin, Mrs. Theodosia Hartshorn, née Verney of the parsonage at Stow-on-the-Wold, the dwelling-house called Beaumont Park, with its home park and home farm being together 263 acres in the said parish, the contents of the South Library being 312 volumes, the Verney family plate of 96 pieces, and the further sum of £4,600 in the 3% consolidated annuities at the Bank of England, to her own absolute use and benefit, and to her heirs at law for ever." He paused one warm, careful moment at the green baize and read the witness line at the foot of the page. "Signed, sealed, published, and declared by the within-named Crispin Verney, as and for his last will and testament, in the presence of us, who at his request, and in his presence, and in the presence of each other, have hereunto subscribed our names as witnesses. Henry Sandys, Solicitor. Cassandra Aubrey, Housekeeper. Inigo Coverdale, Curate of Stow." Mr. Sandys laid the foolscap gentle upon the green baize, and looked up at her over the gold-rimmed spectacles in kind gravity. "That is the bequest, my dear," he said. "You take the dwelling-house and the home park, and the South Library and the Verney plate at your absolute use, and the consols at your free disposition. There is no charge upon the estate beyond the customary household pensions to the 4 upper servants which Mr. Verney directed at his settled hand." Penelope sat one warm, careful moment at the green baize chair, with her gloved hands at her lap, and her warm hazel eyes very direct at the foolscap. She drew one mild, even breath, and inclined her head gentle at Mr. Sandys. "I am very sensible, sir," she said, in gentle, warm Cotswold gravity. "Pray let me hear at narration what else you should think it right I should know." Mr. Sandys folded his hands at the green baize and went on in his gentle, clerkly voice. "The will," he said, "had been the formal close of a long, careful resolve. Mr. Verney had begun in the soft February of 1819, after Dr. Hartwell of Cheltenham had set out the spring diagnosis, to ask discreetly through the parish post about Miss Hartshorn's circumstances at the parsonage. The customary fees of her pianoforte hour, the Reverend Coverdale's kindness at her lodging, the warm, careful pattern of her week. The asking had gone on at his gentle hand for 8 months. The August will was the formal consequence of the 8-month resolve. It was not, Mr. Sandys said warmly, the work of a sick man's last fortnight, but of a careful gentleman who had taken the warm Cotswold time to be certain. Probate had been granted at Doctors' Commons on the 25th of November. No caveat had been entered. I had come down to Beaumont 3 times a year these 11 years past, Mr. Sandys said, gentle at his standish. And I had not heard him speak of your late mother Theodosia at any great length until the February of this year, when he laid the matter at me at the South Library writing table and asked me to draw what he should leave you. The will was drawn at his warm, careful dictation. "Thank you, sir," said Penelope in mild, equable Cotswold composure. "I am very sensible at it." Mr. Sandys drew from the brass-cornered black tin box 4 things and set them upon the foolscap before her. First, the will copy in foolscap, the engrossed copy in his chambers clerk's careful italic, tied at red tape, and sealed at the black wax of Sandys and Company. "You shall keep this at the South Library writing table. The original is at Doctors' Commons. Second, the Bank of England draft for £4,600, drawn at the Threadneedle Street counter in your own name. You shall present it at any country bank at your gentle pace. Third, the keys of Beaumont Park on a brass ring. The 7 keys, in Mr. Mainwaring's customary order: the south door, the south library, the south parlour, the strong room, the plate pantry, the cellar, the south wing dressing room. Fourth, a folded paper at the top of which Mr. Sandys had written, Reverend Inigo Coverdale, the parsonage at Stow-on-the-Wold, Gloucestershire. Penelope laid her gloved hand at the 4 things one warm, careful moment, then drew them gentle into her reticule. "I am very sensible, sir," she said, "of all you have lately done for my mother's cousin and for me. I shall present myself at Beaumont Park on the Sunday afternoon of the 12th, and shall write you a note of my safe arrival." "You are very welcome, Miss Hartshorn," said Mr. Sandys, gentle. "Pray remember that I am at your warm, careful disposition at this chambers at any hour." He came round the green baize with her to the door, took her gloved hand one warm, careful moment, and inclined to her gentle. The chambers clerk handed her her pelisse and her bonnet. Penelope drew them on, set her reticule gentle at her wrist, and went down the worn oaken stair to Old Square at 11:05. She walked back to Carey Street by Chancery Lane, at the gentle, warm, careful pace her aunt had set her. Gentle, upright, in warm, careful Cotswold composure, the cool, clear, pale yellow London morning now tilted softly at noon. She came in at Mrs. Bromhead's front step at 12. Her aunt was at the breakfast-room window with her needlework, and the fire was up at the parlour grate. "My dear," said Mrs. Hartshorn gentle at her warm hand, "sit at this fire one warm, careful moment. Mrs. Bromhead shall have the chocolate at the table at the half-hour." Penelope sat at the warm parlour fire and told her aunt, at gentle, warm, careful narration, the matter of the green baize table and the will copy, and the bank draft and the keys of Beaumont Park, and her aunt listened in mild, equable kindness with her needlework at her lap. They took the chocolate at 12:30 in warm, careful Cotswold composure. The afternoon they spent at a gentle pace. They walked at 3 to the Cotswold bookseller at the upper end of Carey Street, where Penelope took up a clean foolscap pocket-book, 2 new quills, and a calf-bound copy of Mr. Cowper's poems in the warm, pale amber binding the bookseller had set at the window. Her aunt took soft cream paper for her warm Cheltenham correspondence and the newest octavo of Mr. Wordsworth. They came back to Mrs. Bromhead's at 4, took the warm parlour tea at 5, and were at the early candle by 6:30. The Thursday and the Friday were spent at the warm, careful business of preparation for the country journey. Penelope wrote to the Reverend Coverdale, acquainting him of her settled arrival on the Sunday afternoon. She wrote to Mrs. Aubrey by Mr. Sandys's covering hand, with the same kind word. The cool, clear, pale yellow Saturday morning of the 11th of December came up over Aldersgate at 6:30. Penelope and her aunt were at the great inn-yard of the Bull and Mouth at 20 past, with their 2 corded trunks already on the boot, and the warm Cotswold travelling rugs at their laps. The mail went out of the gatehouse at 6:30, at the gentle clatter of the 4 greys and the warm gold of the inn-yard lanterns. They took breakfast at the Bell at Stony Stratford at 9:30, a warm Cotswold pattern of toast and tea and a hot egg in the gentle inn parlour, and went on at 10 through the soft, pale amber winter fields. The afternoon they came down into Oxfordshire at the gentle clatter of the team. The cool, pale yellow light tilted slow at 3 over the chalk uplands. They were at the Crown at Banbury at 4:20, set their trunks at the warm parlour room, took the dinner at the inn parlour at 6, and were at the early candle by 9:30. The Sunday morning of the 12th came up cool and clear at the Banbury chimneys. They breakfasted at 8:30, and at 10 the hired post-chaise came up at the inn-yard, a Banbury chaise with 2 warm bay horses, the post-boy at the saddle in plain brown. They went out of Banbury at the chime of 10, west through the soft, pale yellow Oxfordshire fields toward Chipping Norton, and were at the Cotswold town at noon. They took a cup of warm cocoa at the Fox at the Market Square, then went on west and south at noon through the gentle climbing lanes of the Cotswold uplands. The honeystone walls of the upland farms ran kind and warm at the lane's shoulders. The leafless beech coppices stood gentle at the south slopes. At 2:45, the chaise came over the upper turn of the lane above Stow-on-the-Wold, and Penelope, gentle at the chaise window, saw the warm, pale yellow Cotswold afternoon laid out at the Eve Valley below, the honeystone village of Stow at the further slope, the grey and honey tower of St. Edward's, the soft, pale blue smoke of the chimneys, and at the nearer slope, the warm honeystone south face of Beaumont Park. Beaumont Park stood gentle and warm at the south-facing slope above the Eve Valley, a honeystone country house of the late 17th century. 2 stories of warm Cotswold honeystone with an attic dormer row above the second floor. The south face of 7 tall, mullioned windows in soft Cotswold tracery. A softly pillared Tuscan porch over the south door at the centre. The home park sloped gentle behind the house down to the warm Eve Valley. The leafless beech coppice on the south slope stood soft and leafless at the December afternoon. The warm honeystone Cotswold afternoon light caught the south face at the gentle golden hour, and the 7 mullioned windows took the warm gold of the winter sun in a soft, careful row. Across the dip of the valley, the honeystone village of Stow lay at its further slope, the square tower of St. Edward's, the warm honeystone of the parsonage at the lane's bottom, the soft, pale blue chimney smoke kind and gentle at the chimneys. The post-chaise came down the gentle gravel sweep at the south face at 3 o'clock by the clock above the south porch. Penelope drew one mild, even breath at the chaise window and laid her gloved hand at her aunt's warm wrist one careful moment. "Beaumont Park, my dear," said Mrs. Hartshorn, gentle and warm. "Pray go down at your own gentle pace." The postboy came round, set the step, and handed Penelope down at the gravel before the south porch. Mr. Reuben Mainwaring stood at the south door, 65, butler at Beaumont these 36 years, white hair brushed back, tall, 6 feet thin upright at the honeystone porch, warm grey eyes finely lined at the corners, kind, clean-shaven face, very gentle, in his plain black butler's tailcoat, with the worn brass Verney buttons polished careful, and a clean white cravat at the throat. He inclined to her in gracious kindness. "Miss Hartshorn, you are very welcome at Beaumont Park. Pray come in at the south door at your own gentle pace." He set the south door gentle open at her hand, took her travelling rug at his right arm, and showed her into the warm honeystone south hall. The south hall took the soft, pale yellow Cotswold afternoon at the 7 mullioned windows and laid it warm at the honeystone flags. The fire at the warm honeystone hearth at the east wall ran gentle. A soft amber light caught the worn turkey rug at the centre, and the walnut long case clock at the southwest corner. Mrs. Cassandra Aubrey stood at the south hall in gentle, warm Cotswold gravity to meet her. She was 60, housekeeper at Beaumont these 32 years. Soft iron-grey hair beneath a clean white linen cap, warm hazel eyes very direct, the hartshorn hazel oddly. Penelope marked it gentle at the first moment, slender 5'5" upright, in her soft plum bombazine half-mourning gown with white lawn fichu and the brass and pewter chatelaine at her hip. Behind her stood Mrs. Marjorie Carberry, 53, cook at Beaumont, soft, warm brown-grey hair beneath a large white linen cap, kind hazel eyes, ruddy cheek, in peach and cream print cotton with white apron. At Mrs. Carberry's left stood Mr. Septimus Heathcote, 58, steward of Beaumont and the home farm, sturdy 5'10" upright, soft mid-brown hair, warm blue-grey eyes very gentle, weathered Cotswold honeystone tan skin, in his moss-green Cotswold shooting coat over the fawn waistcoat. Penelope laid her gloved hand at Mrs. Aubrey's warm hand, one gentle, careful moment, drew one mild, even breath, and spoke gentle and warm. "Mrs. Aubrey, I am sensible of how long you served my mother's cousin. Pray keep this house exactly as he kept it." Mrs. Aubrey inclined to her gentle at the warm, honeystone south hall, with the kind, warm Cotswold gravity of a housekeeper who had stood there to meet 4 Verneys in 32 years. "Miss Hartshorn," she said in gentle, warm regard, "I shall, with all my heart. Pray come in at the South Library at your own gentle pace. The fire is up, and the warm Cotswold tea shall be at the half-hour." Mr. Menwaring showed Penelope and her aunt gentle through to the South Library at the back. Mrs. Hartshorn was put up in the south wing dressing-room at her own gentle wish. Penelope asked, gentle and warm careful, to be put up in the lesser north wing chamber, that Mr. Verney's own apartments at the east wing might be kept closed at his last instruction. The South Library was a warm, honey-stone room at the back of the house, 3 sash windows giving south upon the home park and the leafless beech coppice and the cool, pale yellow Eve Valley beyond. 2 warm sea-coal fires were up at the east and the west hearths, gentle and kind at the long, worn turkey rug. The calf-bound volumes stood at their warm, careful order at the 7 oak shelves. The green baize writing table stood at the centre with the pewter standish and the warm honeystone tea-things. At 6, Mrs. Aubrey brought up the warm Cotswold tea at the green baize, and at her gentle hand laid at the South Library writing table a worn green leather book. "Mr. Verney's commonplace book of his last 7 years, my dear," she said in gentle, warm regard. "He had asked me at the august execution to set it at your gentle hand at your settled arrival. Pray take it at your own time." "Thank you, Mrs. Aubrey," said Penelope, gentle and warm, careful. "I shall keep it at the South Library writing table for a slow reading." She laid the worn green leather book gentle upon the green baize, set her warm Cotswold teacup at the right hand of it, and looked one warm, careful moment at the South Library mantel. On the warm honeystone mantel at the east hearth there stood, set between a worn pewter inkwell and a honeystone candlestick, Mr. Verney's worn green leather copy of Cowper's Yardley Oak. The cover was worn at the corners at the careful pattern of one reader's hand over many warm Cotswold years. The green ribbon marker had been laid in at one careful place, and the corner of page 23 was turned down, gentle in the manner of an old reader at his own page. Penelope set her teacup gentle at the saucer, and rose from the green baize and stood one warm, careful moment at the mantel. She did not pick the book up. She read, gentle at the soft, pale yellow afternoon light, the Cotswold marginalia at the foot of the page in Mr. Verney's careful italic. The gentle, warm Cotswold honeystone fashion of the oak above Stow on the Wold at the autumn close. She drew one mild, even breath, and laid her gloved hand one warm, careful moment at the soft, worn cover. she did not take it down. She set her teacup gentle at the saucer at the green baize and turned her warm hazel eyes upon the south sash window, where the warm, pale yellow Cotswold afternoon light was failing gentle at the home park and the leafless beech coppice on the south slope, with the cool, soft blue of the early evening already at the further side of the Eve Valley. She stood at the south sash one warm, careful moment, then laid the worn Yardley oak at the mantel, exactly as she had found it. The Monday morning of the 13th came up cool and clear at the home park. At 10, Mr. Heathcote came round in his moss-green Cotswold shooting coat and showed her the gentle home park at her careful pace, the 263 acres of upland sheep pasture and beech coppice and the soft south slope down to the Eve Valley, the warm honey stone of the home farm at the lower turn of the lane, the upland fields above the south coppice, the clear chalk stream at the western boundary, and the honeystone village of Stow, visible across the valley at noon. They came back at the chime of one in warm, careful Cotswold composure. The Sunday morning of the 19th was Penelope's first at her own pew at St. Edward's. The Reverend Inigo Coverdale gave the customary morning service at 10:30 in his soft, sandy grey kindness. Penelope sat in the Verney pew at the south aisle, the customary place of Mr. Crispin Verney, in gentle, warm Cotswold composure. The Cotswold parish took its gentle, careful measure of the new mistress in warm kindness, and the Reverend Coverdale at the porch, after service, spoke gentle, warm Cotswold words to her at the lych gate. Her week took its warm, careful Cotswold shape. Writing table mornings at the South Library, with the new cowper at her hand. The Monday fell walks, with Mr. Heathcote at the home park and the upper fields. The customary Sunday morning service at St. Edward's, where the Verney pew at the south aisle had been kept her these 3 Sundays past, and the evening tea hour at the South Library at 5:30 with her aunt at the warm hearth. The Christmas Eve service at St. Edward's came at 6:30 of the Friday evening. The warm honeystone nave at the gentle candlelight, the Reverend Coverdale at his soft, pale grey kindness, the Verney pew kept her at the south aisle. Penelope walked back gentle to Beaumont at 8:30 with her aunt at her arm. Christmas Day they kept at gentle warm Cotswold quiet. Mrs. Hartshorn at the south parlour at the south fire with her warm Cheltenham needlework, Penelope at the south library writing table with the new cowper at her hand, the cold Cotswold goose and the mince pies of Mrs. Carberry's careful hand at the 2:30, and were at the early candle by 8:30. The Sunday morning of the 26th of December, St. Stephen's Day, came up cool and clear and warm at the south face. Penelope and her aunt walked down the lane to St. Edward's at the gentle chime of 10. The Reverend Coverdale gave the warm St. Stephen's morning service at the soft honeystone nave. The Verney pew at the south aisle kept her at her own customary place. At the close of service, they walked the lane back to Beaumont, with Mrs. Aubrey 3 paces behind, gentle and warm at the soft, pale yellow Cotswold December afternoon. At the south door, Penelope stopped, one warm, careful moment at the warm honeystone porch, and looked south across the Eve Valley at the honeystone village of Stow, at its further slope. The afternoon was warm, pale yellow Cotswold winter light at the soft tilt of 3 o'clock. The grey and honey tower of St. Edward's lay gentle at the further side of the valley. The cool, soft blue smoke of the village chimneys ran kind and gentle at the warm honeystone roofs. She drew one mild, even breath at the warm honeystone porch, laid her gloved hand at the worn brass handle of the south door one careful moment, and went gentle in. She was settled at Beaumont the Wednesday morning of the 5th of January in the new year of 1820, came up cool and clear over Beaumont Park, the pale yellow Cotswold winter light at the south face, the leafless beech coppice at the south slope at its careful frost. Mr. Mainwaring brought the Morning Post up from the south door at 10:30 and laid the letters at the south library writing table at Penelope's right hand in his warm Cotswold fashion. There were 4. One from Mrs. Sarah Hartshorn at Cheltenham, acquainting her niece of her settled wish to come over for the Lent fortnight. One from Mr. Heathcote upon the early January state of the upland sheep pasture, a short kind note from the Reverend Coverdale upon the parish reading class, and a 4th letter in a strange hand at a Furnival's Inn red wax seal that Penelope had not in her 23 years seen before. She broke the Furnival's Inn seal at the south library, writing table at the cool morning light, unfolded the heavy foolscap, and read the letter through one warm, careful time, and then once again at her own gentle pace. The letter ran in the careful italic of a London barrister's clerk. Furnival's Inn, London, the 3rd of January, 1820. To Miss Penelope Hartshorn of Beaumont Park, Gloucestershire, Madame. I have the honour to write upon the instruction of Sir Bartholomew Quintrell of Quintrell Lodge, Mayfair, a kinsman of the late Mr. Crispin Verney through the female line. Sir Bartholomew lays 3 grounds before you in the spirit of an amicable family settlement. First, that the Verney-Quintrell marriage settlement of the 14th of June, 1762, reserved a tail-male reversion vesting in the Quintrell heirs upon failure of the Verney male line, which failure took place at Mr. Verney's death without issue in November last. Second, that the late Mr. Verney had no power of devise to a non-relative of his line. Third, that the bequest was procured by Mrs. Aubrey and by the Reverend Coverdale at the said Mr. Verney's deathbed, and was at law touched with undue influence. Sir Bartholomew is at present pleased to propose, in the spirit of an amicable family compromise, that you pay over the modest sum of £3,400 within 14 days of this letter, in exchange for which Sir Bartholomew shall withdraw all proceeding at the Court of Chancery. I am, Madam, your obedient servant, Josiah Felton, of Furnival's Inn, barrister. Penelope folded the letter at her gentle hand, and sat at the south library writing table for one warm, careful moment, her warm hazel eyes at the cool, pale yellow Cotswold light at the south sash window, the leafless beech coppice gentle at the south slope. The morning was very quiet at the south library. She heard only the soft tick of Mr. Verney's old bracket clock at the mantel and the kind low murmur of Mrs. Aubrey at her chatelaine in the further passage. She read the letter through a second time in warm, careful Cotswold gravity. The 3 grounds she understood at her own gentle pace, as a young lady who had read her late father's parish papers these 11 years since his death, and knew at the warm honeystone of her Cotswold upbringing the look of a thing said with one face and meant with another. Mrs. Aubrey had been at the South Library writing table at the will execution of the 18th of August as a witness only. Penelope had this from Mr. Sandys at Lincoln's Inn at the 8th of December. And the Reverend Coverdale had been the second witness at the same hour. The deathbed at Furnival's Inn was a thing the Furnival's Inn letter had laid down at its own convenience, and not at the warm, careful truth of the matter. She took up her pen at 11:30, dipped it gentle at the silver standish, and wrote by the same afternoon's post to Mr. Henry Sandys at No. 5 Old Square, Lincoln's Inn, a short kind letter at her own warm gentle hand, enclosing the Furnival's Inn letter, and asking, at his earliest convenience, his settled professional opinion upon the 3 grounds and upon the proposed compromise of £3,400. She sealed the letter at the green Beaumont wax, folded the Furnival's Inn letter within, and gave the packet to Mr. Mainwaring at the South Library door at noon for the Banbury mail coach of 1:30. The Saturday afternoon of the 8th of January came on warm pale yellow at the south face of Beaumont. Mr. Sandys arrived at the south sweep by hired Banbury post-chaise at the 3 of the kind Cotswold afternoon, his thin, upright 6-foot frame at the south door in his plain black superfine, his thinning silver-grey hair, gentle at the warm, low winter sun. Mr. Mainwaring brought him through to the south library at his settled Beaumont fashion. Penelope rose at the south library writing table at his coming, and gave him her warm hand at the small French manner her late mother had taught her. "Mr. Sandys, you have come gentle in upon a kind quiet afternoon. Miss Hartshorn, I have come at the first post that took me. Pray the Furnival's Inn letter." She gave it gentle to his hand. He sat at the second writing chair at the south library writing table, drew his gold-rimmed spectacles up his long, warm scholar's nose, and read the Furnival's Inn letter through at his own gentle Lincoln's Inn pace. His kind grey eyes behind the gold-rimmed spectacles ran slow at the 3 grounds, slow at the proposed compromise, slow at the closing line of the Furnival's Inn barrister, Mr. Felton. Penelope kept at her gentle upright at the first writing chair, her hands folded warm at her lap, Mrs. Aubrey at the further corner at her sewing in proper Beaumont fashion. Mr. Sandys laid the letter at the green baize of the south library writing table at his settled hand, and looked up at her at his warm Lincoln's Inn kindness. "Miss Hartshorn, the 3 grounds are, at my settled professional opinion, at law without foundation. Pray let me lay them down at your own pace. The first, the Verney-Quintrell marriage settlement of 1762. It was a strict settlement reserving the Beaumont estate in tail-mail for 2 generations only, with a tail-mail reversion vesting in the Quintrell heirs upon the failure of the male line. The 2 generations were those of Mr. Augustine Verney's son, Mr. Hilary, and his grandson, your late cousin, Mr. Crispin. The reversion clause expired by its own settled terms at the death of Sir Bartholomew's late father, Sir Hubert Quintrell, on the 7th of May, 1791. The settlement is long spent. Sir Bartholomew has no claim of reversion at law upon Beaumont Park. The second ground falls with the first, the settlement having expired in May of 1791. Your late cousin held Beaumont in fee simple from that date, and had the customary power of devise at his settled wish. You are, moreover, his second cousin by the female line through your late mother, and the devise to you is at law a devise to a relative within the recognized degree. The third, the suggestion of undue influence at the deathbed. Miss Hartshorn, the third ground is a thing the Furnival's Inn letter has laid down at its own convenience, and not at the careful truth of the matter. I attended at Beaumont Park in person upon the 18th of August, 1819, for the execution of your late cousin's will at this very table at 2:30 of that warm, pale gold August afternoon. Mr. Verney was at that hour upright at his settled health, and did not begin his last autumnal decline until the early part of November. Mrs. Aubrey and the Reverend Coverdale were the 2 witnesses as the law requires, and stood at the South Library writing table at the moment of signature as witnesses only. There was no deathbed. He drew from his black leather pocketbook a small folded paper that he had brought down with him from Lincoln's Inn, a fair certified copy of the Chamber's attendance book entry of the 18th of August, 1819, and laid it gentle at the green baize at Penelope's hand. The entry was in his own careful Lincoln's Inn italic, Beaumont Park, August 18th, 1819. 2:30 of the afternoon. Will of Mr. Crispin Verney executed at the South Library writing table. Witnesses, Mrs. Cassandra Aubrey, housekeeper of Beaumont Park, the Reverend Inigo Coverdale, parish curate of St. Edward's at Stow-on-the-Wold, H. Sandys attending. Penelope read the entry through at her warm, gentle hand, and laid it gentle at her elbow. She looked up at Mr. Sandys in mild, firm gravity. "Mr. Sandys, the grounds appear to me to be at law without foundation. Pray answer Mr. Felton in warm Lincoln's Inn fashion." "Miss Hartshorn, I shall draft the answer this Monday at the South Library writing table, with your permission, and post it at the Monday evening mail coach for Banbury." "You have my warm permission, Mr. Sandys. I shall be glad of the Monday at the South Library." Mr. Sandys stayed Saturday evening at Beaumont at Mrs. Aubrey's careful Cotswold hospitality, kept the Sunday morning service at St. Edward's at the Verney pew with Penelope, and on the Monday morning of the 10th of January came up to the South Library writing table at 10 in his plain black superfine, and drew up the formal answer at his own warm Lincoln's Inn hand. The answer was a single careful sheet of London foolscap. It set out the 3 grounds of the Furnival's Inn letter, and answered each at the settled law. To the answer, Mr. Sandys enclosed 3 fair certified copies. A. The Verney Quintrell marriage settlement of the 14th of June, 1762, showing upon its second clause the strict settlement for 2 generations only, with the reversion clause expiring at Sir Hubert Quintrell's death of 1791. B. The Chamber's attendance book entry of the 18th of August, 1819, showing the will execution at the South Library writing table at 2:30 of that August afternoon, with Mrs. Aubrey and the Reverend Coverdale at witness. C. The Reverend Coverdale's signed witness attestation, which Mr. Sandys had sent across at the village of Stow on the Sunday afternoon for the curate's signature, and brought back at the early Monday at the South Library. The answer was sealed in green Beaumont wax at 4:30, and given to Mr. Mainwaring for the Banbury mail coach of the Monday evening. The Friday morning of the 14th of January came up cool and clear over Beaumont Park, the warm, pale yellow Cotswold light at the south face, the leafless beech coppice at the gentle frost. Mr. Mainwaring brought up the Morning Post at 10:30, and laid at the South Library writing table a second letter in the Furnival's Inn hand at the red wax seal. Mr. Sandys had stayed on at Beaumont upon Penelope's gentle invitation, and was at the second writing chair at the South Library writing table at her right hand. He broke the seal at his Lincoln's Inn pace. Mr. Felton's second letter acknowledged the first 2 grounds at his client's settled instruction, the reversion clause indeed spent at 1791, the power of devise indeed unimpaired, but pressed the 3rd ground at a new alleged evidence. He had been instructed at his client's separate inquiry of a former Beaumont undermaid named Becky Tasker, dismissed from Mr. Verney's service without character in October of 1819, who should be willing to give chancery testimony at her settled oath that Mrs. Aubrey had exercised an undue intimacy with Mr. Verney in his last weeks of November. The proceeding upon the 3rd ground alone Sir Bartholomew should at the present hour press forward, unless an amicable family settlement at the original £3,400 were arrived at. Mr. Sandys read the letter through, set it gentle at the green baize, and looked up at Penelope at his warm Lincoln's Inn kindness. Miss Hartshorn, Mrs. Becky Tasker. Mr. Sandys, Mrs. Aubrey is at the further passage. Mrs. Aubrey, pray come. Mrs. Aubrey came up at her warm, soft plum bombazine and her kind hazel gravity. She listened at the green baize at the 3rd ground, drew one gentle even breath, and laid the matter down at her own warm Cotswold kindness. Mr. Sandys. Becky Tasker came to Beaumont in the March of 1819 as the second undermaid at the South Pantry. She was dismissed at my settled wish on the morning of the 15th of October, 1819, Mr. Verney being upright at his settled health at that hour, and the dismissal being entirely at my own authority, for the theft of one of Mr. Verney's silver creamers from the South Pantry on the evening of the 14th of October. The creamer was a small Cotswold piece of the Verney plate, weighing 7 ounces. It was found at her box upon her departure. and she went out at the back gate at 10:30 of the morning of the 15th, without a character. The parish constable of Stow was acquainted at my hand the same afternoon. I have the South Pantry book of October at the housekeeper's room, and shall fetch it gentle. She fetched the pantry book and laid it open at the South Library writing table at the entry of the 14th of October. The silver creamer noted as missing in her own careful hand at the morning of the 15th, with the underlining and the cross-reference to the parish constable at the evening. Mr. Sandys read the entry, took down a fair copy of it in his own Lincoln's Inn italic at her side, and laid the copy gentle at the green baize. Miss Hartshorn, the evidence at law of a witness dismissed without character for theft is, at the present settled state of the courts at Chancery, at law worthless. I shall answer Mr. Felton at the present hour. He drafted at the South Library writing table a short measured second letter dismissing the third ground at the law of the matter. He set out at his careful Lincoln's Inn, hand the dismissal of Becky Tasker for theft on the 15th of October, 1819, the South Pantry book entry, and the parish constable's acquaintance. He set out at the close that the evidence at law was worthless, and that any chancery proceeding upon it must fall at the first hearing. He sealed the letter at the Green Beaumont wax at 3:30, and gave it to Mr. Mainwaring for the Friday evening Banbury mail. The Wednesday morning of the 19th of January, 1820 came up cool and clear at the warm honeystone south face of Beaumont, the leafless beech coppice at its careful Cotswold frost. At 11:30, a hired post-chaise rolled up the south sweep at no settled appointment. Mr. Mainwaring went down to the south door at his warm Beaumont gravity, and returned at 12 to acquaint Penelope at the South Library that Sir Bartholomew Quintrell of Quintrell Lodge, Mayfair, was at the south door upon his own settled wish. Mr. Sandys laid down his pen at the South Library writing table. Miss Hartshorn. He has come at his own hand without sending word. He should be received at the South Parlour at the customary Cotswold fashion. Mr. Sandys. Pray. I shall be in the South Parlour at the upright chair. Mrs. Aubrey at the corner. Mr. Mainwaring at the doorway. You at the writing table at the 4 papers. She rose at her warm, gentle upright, in her plum and cream half-morning gown, at her clean white linen collar, walked through to the South Parlour at the warm Cotswold passage, and took her place at the upright country chair at the South Parlour fire. Mrs. Aubrey came at the second sewing chair at the corner in her soft plum bombazine, her sewing at her warm hazel hand in proper Beaumont chaperonage. Mrs. Sarah Hartshorn, lately come over at the Tuesday morning for the second Lent fortnight, kept the third chair at her warm Cheltenham needlework. Mr. Sandys came at the South Parlour writing table at the south sash window, with his 4 papers at his right hand, the Furnival's Inn letter of the 3rd of January, the Verney Quintrell settlement of 1762, the Chamber's attendance book entry of the 18th of August, 1819, and the South Pantry book of October, 1819. Mr. Mainwaring took up his warm Beaumont post at the parlour doorway. Sir Bartholomew Quintrell was shown gentle in by Mr. Mainwaring at 12. He was a florid, medium-built man of 55 years, 5'9", upright with a Mayfair paunch at his middle, his sandy, thinning hair carefully oiled forward over a high, florid forehead at the broken veins of his nose, a weak, narrow chin at a long upper lip, sallow at the late hours of his Pall Mall houses, in a dark bottle-green wool tailcoat with worn gilt buttons, a primrose-yellow silk waistcoat slightly stained at the lapel, buff pantaloons over town boots that had not been at a Cotswold lane these 11 years. Mr. Mainwaring did not at his customary Beaumont fashion offer the visitor a chair. Sir Bartholomew was kept gentle upright at the worn turkey rug at the south parlour fire for the first 3 minutes, his oily half-smile at the upper lip collapsing by careful degrees. Penelope kept at her warm, gentle upright at the country chair, her hands folded warm at her lap, her warm hazel eyes very direct at his face. Sir Bartholomew, you are come at no settled appointment. Miss Hartshorn, my dear young lady, pray I had hoped at an amicable family conversation upon the late distressing. Sir Bartholomew, Mr. Sandys at the writing table is acquainted of your 3 grounds at the Furnival's Inn letter of the 3rd instant and at the 2nd letter of the 14th. He has the 4 papers at his hand. Pray hear him gentle out. Mr. Sandys rose at the south parlour writing table at his thin, upright Lincoln's Inn manner and laid the 4 papers gentle at the green baize. He took up first the Verney Quintrell settlement of 1762 and read aloud at his own measured Lincoln's Inn, pace the 2nd clause, the strict settlement of 2 generations, the reversion clause vesting at the failure of the male line, the expiration of the reversion clause by its own settled terms at the death of Sir Hubert Quintrell upon the 7th of May, 1791. He laid the settlement gentle down and took up the Chamber's attendance book entry of the 18th of August, 1819, and read aloud the entry. The will executed at the South Library writing table at 2:30 of that warm August afternoon, the witnesses Mrs. Aubrey and the Reverend Coverdale, the attending solicitor, Mr. Sandys himself. He laid the Chamber's entry down and took up the South Pantry book of October 1819, and read aloud the entry of the silver creamer of the 14th of October, and the dismissal of Becky Tasker on the morning of the 15th. Sir Bartholomew's florid complexion, altered at the May 1791 entail expiration entry. The oily half-smile had gone gentle from the upper lip by the close of the Chamber's attendance book. At the South Pantry book of October, the florid colour had gone out of his cheeks at the broken veins of his nose, and he stood at the worn turkey rug at his Mayfair paunch in a settled silence. Penelope rose gentle at her warm upright at the country chair. Her warm hazel eyes were very direct at his face. She spoke at a mild, firm Cotswold gravity that was not raised by one careful note. Sir Bartholomew, you have my answer in one sentence. The 1762 Verney Quintrell settlement was a strict settlement for 2 generations, and is long spent at your late father, Sir Hubert's death of 1791. Mr. Sandys holds the settlement papers and the Chamber's attendance book of the will execution of August last. Your chancery proceeding is at law without foundation, and I shall not pay 6d to secure its withdrawal. Mr. Mainwaring, this gentleman is leaving us. I wish you a gentle journey back to town. Sir Bartholomew opened his weak, narrow chin one careful moment, as if to speak, found at the warm, gentle gravity of Penelope's warm, hazel eyes that there was nothing at the present hour to be said, and closed it again. Mr. Mainwaring inclined gentle at the parlour doorway, in his warm Beaumont gravity. Sir Bartholomew, pray come this way to the south door. Mr. Mainwaring showed Sir Bartholomew gentle out at the south parlour doorway, down the warm Honeystone passage, and out at the south door to his hired post-chaise at the south sweep. The chaise rolled gentle back down the south sweep toward the Stow Road at 20 past noon under the cool, pale yellow Cotswold winter sun. Mr. Mainwaring stood one warm, careful moment at the south door at his thin, upright 6-foot frame, watched the chaise round the lower bend of the sweep, and came back gentle to the south parlour. His incline at the south parlour doorway, at his return, was of the warm Cotswold gravity of a butler of 36 years' service, who had seen his late master's settled intentions vindicated at the post-chaise at the south sweep. The warm grey eyes, finely lined at one careful moment of warm satisfaction, the white-gloved hand at the parlour door handle at his customary Beaumont pace. "Miss Hartshorn, the gentleman is at his road to town." "I thank you, gentle Mr. Mainwaring. Pray ask Mrs. Carberry to send up tea at the South Library at the half-hour." The Thursday morning of the 20th of January came up cool and warm at Beaumont. Mr. Sandys's separate inquiry into Sir Bartholomew Quintrell's affairs, sent up at his own settled hand at the Saturday last to his Lincoln's Inn, London correspondent Mr. Lyle of Chancery Lane, came back at the Thursday evening at the South Library. Mr. Sandys read it through at the South Library writing table at 7:30, and laid the matter gentle before Penelope at the warm sea-coal fire. "Miss Hartshorn, Sir Bartholomew Quintrell of Quintrell Lodge is at this present January at the close of his Mayfair credit. He carries upon him gambling debts at the Pall Mall houses of £4,800. The largest single bond is of 1,600 to Mr. Crockford at the new house in Pall Mall. The remainder is dispersed among 2 other establishments in the same quarter. His Furnival's Inn barrister, Mr. Felton, cannot file the Chancery proceeding upon his behalf without a retainer of 50 guineas, which Sir Bartholomew has been refused at 3 sponsor houses at my own prior information sent up at the Saturday Post. The Chancery proceeding cannot in the present posture be brought." Penelope laid the inquiry gentle at the green baize at her elbow, and gave one warm gentle incline of her warm chestnut head at the sea-coal fire. "Mr. Sandys, then the matter is in the law's careful hand at the present hour." "Miss Hartshorn, it is. I should expect, within a fortnight, a letter of withdrawal at the Furnival's Inn hand." The Friday morning of the 28th of January came up cool and pale yellow over Beaumont, the warm Cotswold winter sun, gentle at the south face. Mr. Mainwaring brought up the Morning Post at the South Library writing table at 10:30, and at the top of the post was a third letter in the Furnival's Inn hand at the red wax seal. Mr. Sandys broke it at the green baize at her side. Mr. Felton's third letter was a short, careful page of London foolscap. His client, Sir Bartholomew Quintrell, upon advisement and at the further consideration of the Verney Quintrell settlement papers and the Chamber's attendance book lately laid before him, was pleased to withdraw the proposed Chancery proceeding at the present hour, and Mr. Felton was at this letter to acquaint Miss Hartshorn accordingly. There was no further proposition of compromise. The matter was at its close. Mr. Sandys laid the letter gentle at the green baize, and looked up at Penelope at his warm Lincoln's Inn kindness. "Miss Hartshorn, the threat is at an end." Penelope laid one warm, careful hand gentle at the green baize beside the Felton withdrawal, and looked at the cool, pale yellow Cotswold morning at the south sash window. "Mr. Sandys, I am very glad of your warm Lincoln's Inn, careful hand at this winter." Mr. Sandys took his leave at the south door at noon, to return to his Lincoln's Inn chambers by the Banbury mail coach. He had been at Beaumont these 3 weeks at her warm Cotswold hospitality, and the leave-taking at the south door was of the warm, gentle gravity of a Lincoln's Inn solicitor of 57 years, who had served the Verney family these 25 years past, the kind grey eyes behind the gold-rimmed spectacles gentle at the south porch, his thin, upright frame at the warm honeystone of the south door, his small black leather pocket-book at his right hand. Mrs. Sarah Hartshorn went up by the same Banbury mail at 1:30 to return to her Cheltenham house at the close of the Lent fortnight. The Saturday afternoon of the 29th of January, 1820 came on cool and pale yellow over Beaumont Park at 3:30. Penelope was at the South Library writing table at her warm, gentle upright in her plum and cream half-morning gown. The Felton withdrawal of the Friday lay folded, gentle, modest at her elbow. Upon the green baize, she did not at the present hour read it again, nor did she at the present hour celebrate. The cool, pale yellow Cotswold afternoon stood gentle over the leafless beech coppice of the south slope. The honeystone village of Stow lay warm at the further slope across the Eve Valley. The warm Cotswold afternoon light failed gentle at the south sash window at the slow tilt of 4 o'clock. Mr. Verney's worn green leather copy of Cowper's Yardley Oak stood at the south library mantel at her right hand, where she had first noticed it, the warm Cotswold December afternoon of her arrival at Beaumont, the soft green leather at the warm sea-coal light. She rose at her gentle upright, took it up gentle at her warm hand, and sat back at the south library writing table at the warm hearth, the small book at her warm, careful hand. She thought one warm, careful moment at the south library hearth of what her late mother Theodosia had carried with her, at 7 years old at Beaumont in the warm summer of 1781, when her own father had brought her up at his particular wish to know her elder cousin Crispin at the Cotswold honeystone south face of the small candle her mother had been then to the Verney family, and the warm, careful regard her cousin had carried for her at every quiet year since. She thought of Mr. Verney at his long Cotswold retirement at Beaumont, these 37 years past, alone at his own gentle hearth at the South Library, never married, with the warm, careful kindness of a man who had loved his cousin's family, at one settled remove and at one warm, careful hand. She thought of what the Verney family had meant to him at his own warm, gentle hour. The small candle his cousin Theodosia had been at her 7 years, the warm, careful regard he had carried for her daughter at every quiet year since, and of the warm honeystone South Library at the cool, pale yellow Cotswold afternoon at the slow tilt of 4 o'clock that was at the present hour her own. The Felton withdrawal lay gentle at her elbow, at the South Library writing table. She did not at the present hour read it again. The warm, worn Cowper at her gentle hand opened at the page Mr. Verney had marked at his careful pencil at the autumn before her arrival, the warm 5th stanza of Yardley Oak, and she read it through at her own warm, gentle pace as the cool, pale yellow Cotswold afternoon failed gentle at the south sash window over the leafless beech coppice of the south slope, and the honeystone village of Stow at the further side of the Eve Valley. The warm Cotswold winter day was at its close at Beaumont Park. The last days of January 1820 came on cool and pale yellow over Beaumont Park, and Penelope, at her gentle upright at the South Library writing table in the plum and cream half-morning gown, took up the warm, careful work of the parish at Stow that her late mother's cousin had asked of her at his sealed letter. She did not go up to town, nor write to the Cheltenham bookseller for any new music. She set her careful hand to the matters at her own Cotswold gate. Her week took its warm, careful Cotswold shape, writing table mornings at the South Library, fell walks with Mr. Heathcote on the Mondays and Thursdays, the parish school's reading class on Wednesdays at Reverend Coverdale's settled arrangement, the customary Sunday morning at St. Edward's, where the Verney pew at the south aisle had been kept her these 8 Sundays past. The writing table mornings were of her gentle Cotswold pace. She wrote at the Green Bays from 9 until noon, the household ledger at her left hand, the Verney commonplace book of his last 7 years at her right, the leather pocket-book of her own careful entries at the inkwell. Mrs. Aubrey came up at 10:30 with chocolate. Mr. Menwaring brought up the Morning Post at 11. The pale yellow Cotswold winter sun crept along the green bays from the south sash window at its own gentle pace. The Monday and Thursday fell walks with Mr. Heathcote were of the Cotswold register her late father had kept her at the parsonage at 12 years old. They went down at 11:30 through the south sweep, across the home pasture to the lower beech coppice, and up the honeystone wall of the south boundary, to the field that looked over the Eve Valley, to the village of Stow. Mr. Heathcote spoke at his warm Cotswold pace of the home farm, the early lambs of the Tregony flock at the lower paddock, the new beech saplings set at the south slope at his own careful planting of the November past, the worn south boundary wall that should be set by Mr. Burwood, the village mason at the Lady Day quarter day. Penelope listened at her gentle Cotswold attention and laid down at her own measured pace the matters of the home park at her own hand. The Wednesday reading class at the parish school at Stow had been settled at Reverend Coverdale's gentle asking at the first Saturday of February. 6 village girls, the eldest 12, the youngest 7, came up at 3 o'clock at the Honeystone schoolroom beside the south porch of St. Edward's. Hetty Tregony, Maggie Coverdale, Bryony Heathcote, Joan Northmore, Lucy Burwood, and Tabitha Mainwaring. Penelope read with them through Miss Edgeworth's Frank at the cloth-bound village copy, and the 5th and 6th stanzas of Cowper's Yardley Oak at her own green leather pocket Cowper that she had brought down from the South Library. She heard the 6 girls read aloud in their Cotswold voices at the schoolroom hearth, and gave to Hetty Tregony, the eldest, the careful task of hearing the youngest Joan Northmore at her own pace. Through the 3 Thursday afternoons of Lent, she gave them, at Reverend Coverdale's settled arrangement, a little French of bonjour and merci and je vous remercie, and a little Latin of amo, amas, amat, at her gentle Cotswold pace and at no theatrical hurry. The Sunday morning at St. Edward's was of the register her late father had kept at the parsonage for 19 years. Mr. Mainwaring brought the Beaumont chaise up at the south sweep at 10:30. Mrs. Aubrey came up beside Penelope at the chaise in her soft plum bombazine. The chaise went down the south sweep and across the lower lane to the Honeystone village at the slow tilt of 11. The Verney pew at the south aisle had been kept her these 8 Sundays past at Reverend Coverdale's gentle hand. Penelope inclined gentle at the south porch at the parish women in their Cotswold bonnets. Mrs. Coverdale, the curate's wife, at the Lake Edge cottage, old Mrs. Burwood at the south paddock croft, Mrs. Tregony of the home pasture, Mrs. Northmore of the upper farm, and went gentle to the Verney pew at her careful pace. Mrs. Sarah Hartshorn, Penelope's late father's only sister at her widowhood at Cheltenham, had been at Beaumont through the first Lent fortnight and had returned at the Tuesday morning of the 1st of February to her Cheltenham house. She wrote at the gentle Cotswold hand of an aunt of 56 years that she should come over for the second Lent fortnight. Penelope wrote at her own warm gratitude. The evening reading companion hour with Mrs. Aubrey at the South Library was of the gentle register the Verney family had kept at the South Hearth these 37 years past. From 7 o'clock to 9 each evening, the two were at the sea-coal fire, Penelope at the wing chair beside the south mantel, Mrs. Aubrey at the parlour chair across the hearth at her sewing of the household linen. They read together at careful turns from Mr. Verney's worn green leather Cowper's Yardley Oak with his careful pencil marginalia, and from the soft blue cloth-bound lyrical ballads of Mr. Wordsworth and Mr. Coleridge, lately come down at the Cheltenham bookseller's parcel of the 11th of February. Mrs. Aubrey's hazel eyes were very direct at the sea-coal light, and her gentle Cotswold reading voice was of the careful pace of a housekeeper of 32 years. The Wednesday afternoon of the 22nd of March, 1820 came up over Beaumont at the pale yellow Cotswold spring sun, the early Cotswold crocuses gentle along the south sweep at their careful pace, the first thrush at the lower beech coppice at his early March song. Penelope was at the South Library writing table at her gentle upright at 3:30, when Mrs. Aubrey came up gentle at the South Library door with a small black leather portfolio at her careful hand. Miss Hartshorn. Mr. Verney had set this gentle at the South Library Aubrey at his last asking of the November past, that I should bring it up at your settled hand at the Cotswold Spring, and at no earlier hour. I have kept it gentle at the Aubrey these 4 months past at his careful asking. Mrs. Aubrey laid the portfolio, gentle at the green baize at Penelope's right hand. Penelope laid down her pen gentle at the inkwell, looked one careful moment at the pale yellow Cotswold afternoon at the south sash window, and untied the worn black ribbon at the portfolio at her own gentle pace. The portfolio held 4 matters. The first was Mr. Verney's commonplace book of the years 1798 to 1819 in worn cloth-bound covers of honeyfawn linen, the pages of careful entries in his own italic, the Cotswold register of a man of 37 years at his own hearth, with frequent gentle reflections at the Cotswold Spring on Penelope's late mother Theodosia, at her 7 years at Beaumont in the summer of 1781, and on the Hartshorn family at the parsonage at Stowe. The second was a cloth-bound bundle of 27 unsent letters in Mr. Verney's careful italic, each at a single sheet of honey-cream foolscap, each folded gentle in the third, each sealed at his gold wax of his own personal seal, each directed to Miss Penelope Hartshorn at the parsonage at Stowe-on-the-Wold in his gentle hand, dated at the careful quarterly pace from her 7th birthday of the 26th of March, 1803 onward, to the Cotswold autumn of 1819. The third was a pencil sketch upon a single sheet of cream drawing paper, Theodosia Verney at 7 years old in the summer of 1781 at the South Library window at Beaumont, the Cotswold candle of the Verney family at her chestnut hair, pinned smooth at the nape. Drawn at careful memory by Mr. Verney at the summer of 1809, after Theodosia's death of the winter chill of the previous January. The fourth was a small black silk pouch, the Verney family pearls at a single row, given to Mr. Verney's mother on her marriage at the parsonage of Bourton-on-the-Hill in the Cotswold summer of 1755, to be given to Penelope upon Mrs. Aubrey's settled judgment. Penelope laid the 4 matters gentle in turn at the green baize. She held the pencil sketch of her late mother at 7 years old, one careful moment at the central crease, looked at the hazel eyes of the small Verney girl at the South Library window in the summer of 1781, the chestnut hair pinned smooth at the nape, the hazel eyes very direct, the gentle mouth, and laid it gentle at her left hand. She thanked Mrs. Aubrey at her warm Cotswold gravity, and asked that the portfolio be left at the South Library writing table at her own careful hand for the slow fortnight of the Cotswold spring afternoons. She read the 27 unsent letters at her gentle Cotswold pace through the fortnight that followed, at the green baize at 3:30 each spring afternoon, 1 letter, or at most 2 at a sitting, the pale yellow afternoon sun, gentle at her chestnut hair, pinned smooth at the nape. The letters in their warm, careful regard held the matters of her own 23 years at the parsonage at Stowe, her late mother Theodosia's young womanhood at the Cotswold summer of 1791 at the parsonage south door, the Reverend Peregrine Hartshorn's gentle Cotswold character at his curacy of 19 years, Penelope's own childhood music lessons at the parsonage pianoforte at her late mother's hand, all heard at careful pace by Mr. Verney at the village post through the Cotswold years. The careful afternoon of the 2nd day of her reading, Thursday the 23rd of March, the pale yellow Cotswold spring sun, gentle at the south sash window at the slow tilt of 4 o'clock. She took up at the portfolio the 3rd of the 27 letters. The 7th birthday letter, dated the 26th of March, 1803, written at the South Library writing table at Beaumont in the warm, pale yellow Cotswold morning of her cousin's birthday week, opened with the salutation, "My dear small Penelope, who shall be 7 years old at Stow this Saturday morning at the parsonage south door." It read, "You shall not, I think, ever read this letter, for I have not yet the courage to send it, but I write it on the morning of your 7th birthday at Stow, in the warm, pale yellow Cotswold autumn of the spring that is the Cotswold March, to set down at the South Library at Beaumont, for my own quiet, what your dear mother Theodosia would have set down had she lived to see it, that the small hartshorn girl at Stow shall keep the Verney candle as I had keep it, and as the Verney family had keep it through 5 Cotswold generations past, and shall be a small good woman in her hour at the parsonage gate. My dear small Penelope, I shall not be at the parsonage south door this Saturday morning with the small Cotswold honeystone bowl of cream I had thought of bringing you. The fault is entirely my own. Your mother's cousin, Crispin Verney." Penelope set the letter down upon the green baize. She held it gentle at the central crease for one warm, careful moment. And then, for the composed quiet of the South Library writing table, she did weep. One careful tear at the right cheek, no more. At the cousin who had not, in her 23 years, come to the parsonage south door with a Cotswold honeystone bowl of cream. Mrs. Aubrey at the parlour side of the writing table set down her sewing and did not speak. She sat in warm, kind Cotswold silence for the quiet 10 minutes that followed. The pale yellow Cotswold spring afternoon went on gentle at the south sash window over the lower beech coppice. The first thrush of the Cotswold March was at his early song at the south slope. Mrs. Aubrey did not rise at the parlour chair, and Penelope did not at the present hour speak. The two were at the gentle silence of 2 Cotswold women who had each in her own careful way held the Verney family at her own gentle hand. After the 10 minutes, Penelope lifted her hazel eyes from the green baize, gave Mrs. Aubrey one gentle incline of her chestnut head, and folded the 7th birthday letter back gentle at its 3rd. She did not at the rest of the fortnight, nor at any hour of the further script that follows, shed a second tear. The warm regard of Mr. Verney at the 27 letters was at her gentle Cotswold hand from that March afternoon at her own pace. She copied 3 other of the 27 letters into her own cloth-bound commonplace book at her gentle italic, the Cotswold reflections of her cousin upon her late mother Theodosia at her 7 years at Beaumont in the summer of 1781, upon the parsonage at Stow at her late father's curacy, upon the parsonage parlour pianoforte at her own childhood at her late mother's hand. The other 24 she folded gentle back into the worn black ribbon at the portfolio, and laid the portfolio gentle at the South Library aumbrey at Mrs. Aubrey's settled hand. Reverend Coverdale came up at the rectory tea of Wednesday the 12th of April at 4:30, at his Cotswold cassock and his gold-rimmed spectacles. He sat at the south parlour wing-chair across the sea-coal hearth, took the Beaumont china at Mrs. Carberry's careful hand, and observed at his gentle Cotswold pace that he had had at the October of the year passed one last careful conversation with Mr. Verney at the South Library. At the careful close of an afternoon visit on which Mr. Verney had been at his settled hour upon the writing-table chair at the green baize, Miss Hartshorn. He spoke to me at that October afternoon at the careful asking pardon of a man at the close of his Cotswold hour. He asked at his careful hand that I should bring his small Cotswold candle, and at that gentle pace he meant yourself, my dear, the black leather portfolio at the South Library aumbrey, with his warm, careful asking pardon for the 23 years he had not come over to the parsonage south door. Penelope laid her careful hand gentle upon the green baize of the south parlour table beside the Beaumont china, and inclined her chestnut head at his warm Cotswold kindness. Reverend Coverdale. The portfolio was at Mrs. Aubrey's settled hand at the Wednesday of the 22nd of March at the Cotswold Spring. The matter is at its careful place at the present hour. Miss Hartshorn. I am very glad of it, my dear. The Lady Day Quarter Day of Saturday the 25th of March 1820 was the first quarter day of Penelope's own Cotswold ownership at Beaumont Park. The home pasture tenants came up at 10:30 at the South Library writing table at Mr. Heathcote's settled arrangement. Mr. Tregony, the home pasture tenant in his Cotswold smock, at his careful manner. Mrs. Coverdale, the curate's wife at the Lake Edge cottage in her clean fawn cotton gown. Old Mr. Burwood at the South Paddock Croft in his worn moss-green wool coat. Mr. Heathcote brought up the customary account at the Green Bays. The home pasture rent of the Tregony farm was the customary March quarter at the Green Bays. The cottage rents of Mrs. Coverdale at the Lake Edge and old Mr. Burwood at the South Paddock Croft were the customary quarter at the careful Cotswold pace. Penelope signed the Verney quarter-day account at the careful close of the morning in her gentle, warm italic at the Green Bays. Penelope Hartshorn in the parish of Stow-on-the-Wold, this Saturday the 25th of March, 1820, and laid down the pen gentle at the inkwell. The three tenants took their Cotswold leave at the south door at the slow tilt of noon, and Mr. Heathcote took up the account at his steward's hand to be laid gentle at the home farm strong-box at the careful close of the morning. The Wednesday afternoon of the 12th of April brought the Cotswold schoolgirls of Penelope's reading class up at the south porch at 3 o'clock in their clean Cotswold print frocks. They had come up the lower lane at Hetty Tregony's, careful leading at her 12 years, and at Maggie Coverdale's gentle hand at her 11 years, the 6 girls in Cotswold order at the south porch. Hetty Tregony, at her chestnut plait and her warm Cotswold gravity, held at her hand a small cloth-bound wildflower album of pressed Cotswold early spring blossoms, primroses, violets, early Cotswold crocus, the first honeysuckle of the south wall at the parsonage, bound gentle at the cream linen by Hetty's own careful hand at the parsonage kitchen table of the previous Saturday afternoon. Miss Hartshorn. We had thought, the 6 of us, that the Cotswold spring at Beaumont and the gentle Wednesday afternoons at the schoolroom should have a Cotswold remembrance at your own careful hand. We had pressed the wildflowers at February and March, and Maggie and I had bound the album gentle on the Saturday last. Penelope received the wildflower album at the south porch in gracious, gentle Cotswold gratitude. She inclined her chestnut head gentle at each of the 6 village girls in turn: Hetty, Maggie, Bryony, Joan, Lucy, Tabitha, and took them gentle up to the South Library at Mrs. Aubrey's careful direction. At the South Library mantel, she gave each of the 6 girls a small cloth-bound Aesop from the worn South Library shelf, the honey-fawn covers at the gentle Cotswold pace, each at the front, fly-leaf inscribed gentle at her careful italic, to Hetty Tregony, this 12th of April, 1820, from Miss Hartshorn, Beaumont Park, with my warm, careful Cotswold thanks. P.H. Asterisk. The mid-April brought up at the gentle Cotswold pace the Verney family pearls. Mrs. Aubrey came up at the Wednesday morning of the 19th of April at 10:30 with the black silk pouch at her careful hand at the South Library writing table. Miss Hartshorn. Mr. Verney had asked, at his careful November asking pardon, that the Verney pearls be set at your careful throat, at my own settled judgment, at the Cotswold spring of your gentle settling at Beaumont. I had thought, at the careful Easter at hand, that the careful hour was at its place. Penelope laid down her pen, gentle at the inkwell. Mrs. Aubrey opened the silk pouch at the Green Bays. The Verney family pearls, a single row of pearls of moderate Cotswold worth, given to Mr. Verney's mother on her marriage at the parsonage at Bourton-on-the-Hill in the Cotswold summer of 1755, set at the gold clasp at the lower end, lay gentle at the cream silk lining. Penelope took the roe gentle in her careful hand, and looked at it one gentle moment in warm Cotswold gravity. Mrs. Aubrey, I thank you, gentle, for the careful settled judgment at this Cotswold April. The pearls shall be at the careful Easter at St. Edward's, at your own settled hand. The pianoforte at the South Library by the south sash window was the Verney instrument of a careful Cotswold maker of 1791, a walnut square pianoforte of honey amber polish, the cream ivory of the keys at her careful hand. Penelope played at the gentle evenings for Mrs. Aubrey at the sea-coal hearth, the airs of Mr. Handel and Mr. Haydn at her own careful pace, the Cotswold ballads of her late mother Theodosia at her own gentle hand. Reverend Coverdale called on the Friday afternoon of the 21st of April at 4:30 to ask, at his Cotswold gravity, if Penelope would play at the Stow Parish School annual prize-giving at the village hall on the Wednesday of the 18th of May. Miss Hartshorn, the parish school's prize-giving at the village hall at 3:30 on the 18th of May should be at its careful gratification by the Cotswold airs at your gentle hand at the village pianoforte. I had thought to ask gentle at this Easter week. Penelope acquiesced at her kind, gentle Cotswold gravity. Reverend Coverdale, I shall. At the Wednesday of the 18th of May at 3:30 at the village hall. The late, pale yellow Cotswold April brought up Penelope's half-mourning gentle to its careful close. The plum and cream half-mourning gown that she had worn through the 4.5 months of Cotswold winter, through the January at Sir Bartholomew's hour at the south parlour rug, through the February of the reading class, and through the March of the 27 unsent letters, was laid gentle at the north wing wardrobe at the Tuesday morning of the 18th of April. In its place, she took down the fresh cream and honeysuckle sprigged muslin of her late mother Theodosia, at the worn parsonage trunk that she had brought up from Stow at the December past, the gown that her late mother had worn at the summer of 1808, at her last gentle hour at the parsonage south door. Mrs. Aubrey took the muslin gentle at her careful hand, and at the gentle care of a housekeeper of 32 years, she pressed it at the Honeystone laundry of the south wing. The Easter Sunday morning of the 23rd of April, 1820 came up over Beaumont in the pale yellow Cotswold spring sun, the Cotswold thrushes at the lower beech coppice at their careful Easter song, the Honeystone village of Stow Gentle in the dip across the Eve Valley at the pale yellow Cotswold morning. Penelope was at the north wing chamber at 9:30 in the fresh, cream and honeysuckle sprigged muslin half morning gown of her late mother Theodosia. At the bodice she had pinned, at her own careful hand at the north wing dressing table, a sprig of early Cotswold honeysuckle from the south wall of the South Library, the first sprig of the Cotswold spring of her own Cotswold ownership. The Verney pearls were at the careful row at her throat, at Mrs. Aubrey's settled hand at the gold clasp at the nape. Mr. Mainwaring brought up the Beaumont chaise at the south sweep at 10:30. Mrs. Aubrey, in her soft, plum bombazine and her clean white linen cap, came up gentle beside Penelope at the chaise. The chaise went down the south sweep at the slow tilt of 11, across the lower lane to the Honeystone village of Stow, and up at the south porch of St. Edward's at the slow tilt of 11:45. Reverend Coverdale read the Easter service at the south chancel at his warm Cotswold gravity. The Verney pew at the south aisle was at Penelope's gentle, careful seat, the green leather cowper at her careful hand at the third hymn, the Easter sun at the south aisle window at her own chestnut hair. The Cotswold parish was gentle at the Easter pews, the Tregonys at the middle aisle, the Coverdales of the lake edge at the second pew at the south aisle, the Heathcotes at the rear of the south aisle, the Burwoods at the north aisle. The Easter service closed at the careful Cotswold pace at the slow tilt of noon. Penelope went down gentle from the Verney pew at the close of the service at her own careful pace, Mrs. Aubrey 3 paces at her hand. At the south porch at 20 past noon, in the pale yellow Cotswold spring sun at the Honeystone porch arch, an unfamiliar Cotswold gentleman stood at the gentle gravity of a man who had been at the Cotswold higher ground of Beauchamp Court these 8 years past, since his late wife's 3-year mourning had begun, and was at the south porch this Easter Sunday at his daughter Cecilia's settled wish. He was tall, lean upright at his 6'1" frame, his dark chestnut hair cut close at the nape with one streak of pure silver at the right temple, his hazel eyes very direct at the pale yellow Cotswold morning, the colour of Cotswold honeystone at the autumn close, true cool honey amber, his gentle firm mouth at the careful Cotswold pace, his weathered fair Cotswold skin at the Easter sun, the Beauchamp marquisate signet of a stag's head over 3 honeysuckle blooms at the ring at his right hand, in his honey-fawn country morning coat over his plain cream waistcoat. He inclined gentle and deep at Penelope and at Reverend Coverdale at the south porch. Reverend Coverdale, at his warm Cotswold gravity at the south porch, made the careful introduction at his gentle Cotswold pace. Miss Hartshorn, Lord Hugo Beauchamp, 5th Marquess of Stow-on-the-Wold, of Beauchamp Court, 3 miles north on the higher ground. Lord Hugo is the lay patron of the Stow living and the standing improver of the Stow Parish School these 11 years past. Lord Hugo inclined warm and gentle at Penelope at the Honeystone porch arch. His voice, when he spoke at the warm, careful Cotswold pace of a marquess at his home parish, was of the careful Cotswold register of a man of 36 years, at the settled hour of his late wife's 3-year mourning, newly eased to its half-mourning at his daughter Cecilia's settled wish. Miss Hartshorn. I had known Mr. Verney since the Cotswold autumn of 1812, at the careful improving work of the north windows of the Stow Parish School, which he had taken at his settled hand at the same year I had taken the lay patronage of the Stow living. I was moved at the November of the year past at his bereavement. I have come over from Beauchamp at this Easter Sunday, at my late Lady Marianne's 3-year mourning, being newly eased at my daughter Cecilia's settled wish, and at the careful asking of Reverend Coverdale at the Easter week. Penelope, at her gentle, warm Cotswold composure at the south porch in the cream and honeysuckle sprigged muslin and the Verney pearls at her throat, inclined her chestnut head gentle at his bore. Lord Hugo, I am moved by your kindness in coming over. Reverend Coverdale walked them gentle to the lych gate at the south side of the churchyard at the slow tilt of 12 o'clock. Lord Hugo took his careful leave at 20 past noon. One further gentle bow at Penelope, one gentle incline at Reverend Coverdale, and went gentle to his Beauchamp Court chaise at the Stow Lane. Penelope walked back along the Stow Lane to Beaumont, at her gentle Cotswold pace, Mrs. Aubrey 3 paces at her gentle hand, the Easter Sunday afternoon sun warm at the honeystone walls of the lane. At the south porch of Beaumont at 12:30, she paused one careful moment at the honeystone arch and looked south across the Eve Valley to the pale yellow Cotswold afternoon over the honeystone village of Stow at the further slope. The Cotswold thrushes at the lower beech coppice still at their careful Easter song, the first sprigs of honeysuckle at the south wall of Beaumont, gentle in the Easter sun, sensible at her own careful hour of an alteration in her own Cotswold life that she would not at the present hour attempt to name. The Easter Sunday afternoon at Beaumont Park closed at the south porch in warm, kind Cotswold equanimity. Act 5. Lord Hugo Beauchamp. On the warm, pale yellow Saturday afternoon of the 6th of May, 1820, at 3 o'clock, the Beauchamp court chaise drew up at the south porch of Beaumont Park in the soft Cotswold spring light, and Lord Hugo Beauchamp, 5th Marquess of Stow-on-the-Wold, handed down his daughter the Honourable Cecilia Beauchamp, his elder sister, Lady Clarissa Sandys, and his brother-in-law, Sir Geoffrey Sandys, lately come over from Sandys Hall near Banbury for the early May fortnight. Lord Hugo at 6'1", dark chestnut hair cut close at the nape, with one streak of pure silver at the right temple, was in honey-fawn country coat over cream waistcoat, the Beauchamp signet, a stag's head over 3 honeysuckle blooms. On his right hand, his warm hazel eyes settling gentle on the south face of Beaumont. The Honourable Cecilia Beauchamp, 7 years old, came up at her father's right hand. Auburn brown hair plaited in 2 braids tied with honeysuckle cream ribbons. Warm hazel eyes her father's. Gentle mouth in honeysuckle cream and peach-sprigged muslin morning frock. Lady Clarissa Sandy née Beauchamp, 39, came up at Sir Geoffrey's arm. Dark chestnut hair pinned smooth under a fine lace cap. Warm hazel eyes her brother's. Kind mouth, slender 5'6", in soft amber silk morning gown with white lace fichu. Sir Geoffrey Sandys, 45, the Oxfordshire J.P. for the Banbury bench, was sturdy, 5'10", with mid-brown hair, warm blue-grey eyes, kind open face, in moss-green country coat with fawn waistcoat. Mrs. Cassandra Aubrey received them at the south door in her warm, careful Beaumont fashion, and led them through to the south library, where Miss Penelope Hartshorn was at the warm sea-coal fire with fine work at her lap. Penelope rose gentle. Tea was laid at 3:30 at the round walnut table at the south window. The conversation came on in the warm, careful Cotswold register. Lord Hugo had, he gave Penelope to understand at the teacups, known the late Mr. Crispin Verney since the autumn of 1812 as the considered improver of the Stow Parish School, and had served at the Parish School Committee at Mr. Verney's right hand for the 11 years to the autumn of Mr. Verney's last decline. Penelope inclined warm and gentle. Lady Clarissa, very kind at the teacup, gave Penelope her own warm Banbury welcome to the Cotswold neighbourhood. Sir Geoffrey spoke in his warm Oxfordshire fashion of the Cotswold botany at the south slope. Cecilia, on the low chintz stool at her father's knee, took to Penelope at once. She came up at Penelope's settled gesture, gave her warm 7-year-old curtsy in the Cotswold lisp of her age, and asked Penelope softly, with the gentle gravity of an only child, whether she might come over from Beauchamp Court on Tuesdays in the South Library, reading hour to read with her at the warm sea-coal fire. Lord Hugo's warm hazel eyes settled gentle on his daughter at the question. Penelope acquiesced with warm, gracious composure, and Cecilia, very pleased, settled back with her honeysuckle cream ribbons at the firelight. It was Cecilia, in the next quarter hour, who noticed Mr. Verney's worn green leather Cowper Yardley oak on the south library mantel. She slipped down, took the volume up in her careful hands, and brought it over to Penelope. She asked her softly whether her papa might read it aloud some afternoon, as papa has the warm voice for the Cowper, Miss Hartshorn. Penelope acquiesced with gentle, gracious composure. Lord Hugo's warm hazel eyes met hers across the hearth for one warm, careful moment. She set her teacup down, gentle in the saucer, and the warm Cotswold light caught the green leather binding at her hand. Lady Clarissa observed the moment from the soft amber silk of her gown, and said nothing. The Beauchamp party took their leave at 5. Cecilia, at the south porch, gave Penelope her own mittened hand and her warm goodbye, and the chaise drew away. So the Tuesday afternoons of May and June were settled. Lord Hugo's calls at the South Library reading hour were appointed for 1 o'clock of each Tuesday for the hour, at Mrs. Aubrey's customary chaperonage. Mrs. Sarah Hartshorn, Penelope's late father's only sister, 56, the widow at Cheltenham, lately come over for the May fortnight at Penelope's settled wish, was at the second sash window with her fine work, 3 paces off and within hearing. They read together from Cowper. Lord Hugo at the right-hand wing chair at the south library hearth, Penelope at the reading lectern at the south window with the warm Cotswold light upon the page. They read from Yardley Oak at the first Tuesday and the second, from the Task at the third, from Mr. Wordsworth's lyrical ballads, lately come down from Cheltenham at Mrs. Sarah's kind agency, at the fourth. Lord Hugo's voice was warm and gentle and measured, the cadence of a man who had read Cowper aloud to his late mother in the old Beauchamp drawing-room these many years past. Penelope's voice was warm and gentle and level, the cadence of a parson's daughter who had been read Cowper at her late father's hand at the parsonage fire in her girlhood. The third Tuesday fell on the warm pale yellow afternoon of the 23rd of May, 1820. Lord Hugo was at the right-hand wing chair in honey-fawn morning coat, his warm hazel eyes upon the page, Penelope at the reading lectern in cream and honeysuckle-sprigged muslin morning gown, the Verney pearls at her throat, Mrs. Aubrey at the second sash window with her work. Penelope had taken up Mr. Wordsworth's We Are Seven at Lord Hugo's settled wish. She read through the first stanza in her warm, gentle voice, through the second, and was at the third, the line about the Cumbrian girl at her brother's grave, when she caught Lord Hugo's warm hazel eyes upon her from the wing chair. She looked away one moment too quickly. Her gaze settled back on the page. She read on through the fourth stanza in a warm, careful voice that was a fraction lower than the third stanza had been. Mrs. Aubrey observed the moment in her warm, kind Cotswold silence and made no remark upon it. She drew her needle through the white linen and watched the warm afternoon light upon the south library carpet. Penelope, at the reading lectern, had not, in her 23 years at the Stow parsonage and the Cotswold lanes, allowed herself to consider what it might be to be looked at in that warm, careful way. She had not, at present, any settled opinion of the matter, except that the Wordsworth at her hand had grown to be a different book at the third stanza than it had been at the first, and that the warm hazel of his eyes at the hearth was a colour she had not, at 25 years of music lessons at Stow, learnt to give a proper name to. She read on through the fifth stanza in a warm, careful Cotswold voice that the afternoon light did not, at 3 o'clock, betray. So the Tuesdays of May and June went on, and so the Wednesday afternoon walks came on at Mrs. Aubrey's settled suggestion. Lord Hugo rode over from Beauchamp Court at 2:30, gave his bay gelding to Mr. Heathcote at the home farm gate, and walked the home park's south slope with Penelope for the half-hour at the close of her parish reading class. Mrs. Aubrey came 3 paces behind in soft plum bombazine. They spoke, in those warm, careful Cotswold half-hours, of Mr. Verney's botany at the south slope, of Cecilia's Latin under Miss Featherstone the governess at the west schoolroom, of the winter Cotswold shooting, and one Wednesday at the close of May, of Lord Hugo's late mother Lady Beauchamp's old walled garden at Beauchamp Court, a half-acre of warm honey-stone walls at the south side of the west wing, planted in the late summer of 1786 by the late Marchioness with her own warm, careful hands, and not planted these 8 years since her death in the autumn of 1812. Penelope inclined warm and gentle at the home park style, and said she would be glad to see Lady Beauchamp's old walled garden at the warm Cotswold summers coming on. Lord Hugo's warm hazel eyes settled gentle on her face for one warm, careful moment, and they walked on along the home park's south slope. It was on the next Wednesday, the warm pale gold afternoon of the 17th of May, that Cecilia came up to Beaumont with her father. The chaise drew up at 2 o'clock, Cecilia in the same sprigged muslin frock, the honeysuckle cream ribbons in her braids, she was given over to Penelope at the south porch. The three of them walked the south slope together at 2:30, Lord Hugo at Penelope's right hand, Cecilia between them, Mrs. Aubrey 3 paces behind. At the Home Park stile, where the Eve Valley dropped away to Stowe, Cecilia took Penelope's gloved hand in her mittened one and looked up at her in the 7-year-old gravity of an only child. "Miss Hartshorn," she said in her warm Cotswold lisp at the stile, "you are to come to Beauchamp soon, please, to look at my own old wooden doll's house. It has been at the West Nursery these 40 years and more, since my late grandmother Lady Beauchamp's girlhood in the summer of 1779. Papa has had it down from the attic for me last Michaelmas. You will come, please." Penelope inclined warm and gentle at the stile, gave Cecilia's mittened hand a warm pressure in her gloved one, and gave Cecilia her gloved promise. "Cecilia, I shall come over at the first warm Saturday your papa shall send the chaise. I am very glad of your doll's house. I had one myself at the parsonage in my girlhood, given me by my late mother Theodosia at my 7th birthday, and I have not forgot a single one of the painted rooms of it." Cecilia, very pleased, slipped her mittened hand into Lord Hugo's right one at her other side, and the three of them walked back to the south porch at the warm Cotswold afternoon's close. Lord Hugo's warm hazel eyes met Penelope's at the south porch for one warm, careful moment, and the chaise drew away. So the warm, pale Cotswold June came on. Lord Hugo's Tuesday reading hours at the South Library, his Wednesday walks at the Home Park, Cecilia's 2 Saturday visits at Beaumont, and Penelope's 3 Saturday visits at the West Nursery, where she did indeed admire the doll's house in the 7-year-old gravity it was due. The warm, pale cream Cotswold honeysuckle came out at the south wall of Beaumont in the last week of June. It was on the warm, pale yellow Wednesday afternoon of the 28th of June, 1820, at the close of the reading hour, that Lord Hugo asked her the question. He was at the right-hand wing chair, Penelope at the reading lectern, Mrs. Aubrey at the second sash window with her work, and the cowper, lately closed at the Yardley Oak 3rd book, was at the round walnut table at Penelope's right hand. "Miss Hartshorn," he said gentle from the wing chair, "I shall ask you a warm, careful kindness. Would you be at home to me, at the south parlour, on Saturday afternoons through July from 3 to 5, at Mrs. Aubrey's customary chaperonage? I do not press the question, and I shall be very gratified by whatever warm, careful answer your own settled time gives you." Penelope inclined warm and gentle. She set the cowper on the table at her right hand, turned her warm hazel eyes upon Lord Hugo in warm, careful Cotswold gravity, and acquiesced gentle. "Lord Hugo, I shall be at home to you at the south parlour through July. I am very gratified by your warm, careful asking, and I should be glad of the Saturday hour through the Cotswold summer." Lord Hugo's warm hazel eyes settled gentle on her face for one warm, careful moment, and the reading hour came to its close at the soft sea-coal fire. So the 4 Saturdays of July were settled. The south parlour, the smaller of the 2 morning parlours, on the south face at the 3rd sash window, papered in soft, warm honey damask of the 1782 fashion, with a worn Turkey rug at the hearth, and an upright country chair at the south sash, was the setting of those 4 July afternoons. Lord Hugo came over at 3 o'clock of each Saturday, Cecilia sometimes with him, and sometimes at the Beauchamp Court West Nursery with Miss Featherstone. Penelope received him at the upright country chair in sprigged muslin morning gown, with the Verney pearls at the throat, Mrs. Aubrey at the second sash window with her fine work, Mrs. Sarah Hartshorn 3 paces off at the same window. They walked the Home Park south slope from 4 to 5 at the close of each call. The Cotswold honeysuckle was at full bloom on the south wall at the 2nd Saturday, and at full warm scent at the 3rd and the 4th. And so, The warm, pale yellow Saturday afternoon of the 5th of August, 1820 came on. Lord Hugo arrived at the south porch at 3 o'clock in honeyfawn morning, coat over plain cream waistcoat, the Beauchamp signet at his right hand, the green leather commonplace book of his late father, the 4th Marquess, in his right hand. Mrs. Aubrey gave him through to the south parlour, where Penelope was at the upright country chair at the warm afternoon light through the 3rd sash window, in sprigged muslin morning gown with the Verney pearls at her throat. Mrs. Aubrey settled gentle at the 2nd sash window. Mrs. Sarah Hartshorn, at her own warm, careful Cotswold judgment, was 3 paces off. Lord Hugo came over to the rug at the warm, careful pace of a man who had been at the asking these 8 years past. He knelt gentle at the worn turkey rug to be at Penelope's level, the commonplace book in his right hand, and his warm hazel eyes settled gentle on her face. "Miss Hartshorn," he said gentle from the rug, "I shall ask the thing now. In the warm, careful Cotswold form my late father, the 4th Marquess, kept in his commonplace book at Beauchamp these years past. I had not, when my late father had first known your mother's cousin, Mr. Crispin Verney, at the Stow Parish School subscription of 1810, foreseen this. The connection of houses I had not then foreseen. I have loved you with what gentle, warm dignity I could, and what warm, careful patience the 4 months have required, since the south porch of St. Edward's on Easter Sunday morning, the 23rd of April, 1820, when Reverend Coverdale gave me the honour of your acquaintance. I am asking now, on no other ground than that I have loved you at the warm, careful pace your 8 months at this house have allowed me, to do me the honour of becoming my Marchioness. You have known me too short a time to be in love with me yet. I shall not press you on that, my dear, and I would not have you give me your warm, careful answer at any other pace than your own. I shall ask only that you consider the question at your own time, and if your warm, careful answer is yes, I shall do my best at Beauchamp to deserve it. If your answer is no, my Tuesday and Wednesday and Saturday calls at this house shall continue undiminished while you shall suffer them, and the question shall never be raised again." He closed the commonplace book gentle and settled it on the turkey rug at his right knee. His warm hazel eyes were upon her face. The Cotswold honeysuckle scent came in from the south wall. Penelope, at the upright country chair, was very gentle and warm at the warm, careful afternoon light. She drew one warm, careful breath, set her gloved hands gentle in her lap upon the cream and honeysuckle muslin, and turned her warm hazel eyes upon Lord Hugo in gentle, warm Cotswold composure. "Lord Hugo, I shall." She paused one warm Cotswold moment at the south parlour hearth, and added gentle in the warm, careful cadence of a woman who had been at her own warm thinking these last 7 Tuesday reading hours. "I shall, and I should be glad of the Tuesday hour we have had at the South Library to continue by Lady Clarissa's standing wish, even after the wedding bells of Stow." Lord Hugo, at the worn turkey rug at the hearth, inclined gentle. The warm hazel eyes settled upon her face for one warm, careful Cotswold moment that he did not seem to wish to end. He drew one gentle breath and gave her his own warm Cotswold answer in the gentle measured cadence of his father's. "My dear Miss Hartshorn, I had not, until this Saturday minute at the rug, foreseen the gentle Cotswold quiet at the close of the Tuesday hour shall be the candle of my Beauchamp evenings to come. I am very gratified by your warm, careful answer." He rose from the turkey rug. He came over to the upright country chair, took Penelope's gloved right hand in his own, and inclined his dark chestnut head over it at the warm afternoon light. The Beauchamp signet caught the warm Cotswold light at his finger. Mrs. Aubrey drew her needle gentle through the white linen and observed the moment in her warm, kind Cotswold silence. Mrs. Sarah Hartshorn, 3 paces off, was the warm, careful witness of 45 years of Cotswold marriages, and she did not, at this one, find anything to remark upon. Cecilia was brought down by Mrs. Aubrey from the Beaumont nursery at 3:30, very neat at her 7-year-old gravity. Mrs. Aubrey gave her gentle over to her father at the south parlour hearth, and Lord Hugo took his daughter up at his right knee. "Cecilia, my dear, Miss Hartshorn has done me the honour of agreeing to become my Marchioness and to come over to Beauchamp Court with us at the late summer's wedding bells. She shall be the warm, careful stepmother to you, and I shall be very glad of your own warm welcome to her." Cecilia received the Cotswold news with her warm 7-year-old gravity. She slipped down from her father's knee, came over to Penelope at the upright country chair, gave her warm Cotswold curtsy at the cream and honeysuckle muslin, and pronounced in her warm Cotswold lisp, "Miss Hartshorn, Mamma, I should be very glad of a stepmother who reads the Cowper at the warm pace Papa reads it. I shall come over from the Beauchamp Court West Nursery on Tuesdays at the South Library reading hour, please, in our settled time." Lord Hugo's warm hazel eyes settled gentle on his daughter. He drew Cecilia back to his right knee and gave Penelope his own warm Cotswold smile. Penelope returned it gentle, in warm, careful Cotswold composure, and gave Cecilia her own gloved hand. Mr. Mainwaring came in at 4 o'clock, with the tray Mrs. Aubrey had appointed for the close of the Saturday hour. Mrs. Carberry had sent up a warm Cotswold seed cake and the Beaumont best Madeira. The 4 of them, Lord Hugo, Penelope, Cecilia, and Mrs. Aubrey, took the seed cake and the Madeira in the warm, careful Cotswold afternoon light. The banns were read out at St. Edward's by the Reverend Inigo Coverdale on the Sundays of the 13th, the 20th, and the 27th of August, in the warm Cotswold cadence of his 54 years at the parish life. There was no impediment. So, the warm, pale gold Saturday morning of the 9th of September, 1820, at 10 o'clock, came on at the parish church of St. Edward the Confessor at Stow-on-the-Wold. The Reverend Inigo Coverdale, at the chancel step in clean white linen surplice, over plain black cassock, the warm blue-grey eyes very gentle behind the gold-rimmed spectacles. Mr. Henry Sandys, 57, in plain black superfine, gave the bride away in the warm, careful Cotswold fashion of a sole executor and an old family friend of 3 winters' standing. Mrs. Sarah Hartshorn, in warm peach silk morning gown with white lace fichu, was the matron of honour at the bride's right hand. Lady Clarissa Sandys, in soft amber silk morning gown, was at the front pew with Cecilia, in fresh sprigged muslin on her lap. Sir Geoffrey Sandys, in moss green country coat, was at Lord Hugo's right side. The Stow parish in their warm Sunday best at the back pews, the Beauchamp Court household behind them, Mr. Mainwaring and Mrs. Aubrey and Mrs. Carberry and Mr. Heathcote of Beaumont in their own Cotswold pew. The bride came up the south aisle on Mr. Sandys's right arm in cream Cotswold muslin morning gown, made by Mrs. Coverdale, the warm village dressmaker of 40 years at the Stow parish, with a sprig of late summer Cotswold honeysuckle, and one warm pale cream Cotswold, rose pinned at the bodice in the customary Stow village fashion. The Verney family pearls at her throat, long ivory silk gloves to the elbow. Her late mother, Theodosia's silver locket, worn beneath the bodice in gentle filial remembrance. The Reverend Coverdale gave the warm, careful Cotswold marriage at his settled cadence, in the warm, pale gold light through the south aisle window. The vows were given gentle by Lord Hugo in his warm Cotswold cadence, and gentle by Penelope at his right hand in her own. The Beauchamp signet ring was given over for the warm, careful blessing, and given back, Cecilia on Lady Clarissa's lap, watched the wedding of her father and her new stepmother in the warm 7-year-old gravity of her age. The wedding breakfast was at Beaumont Park at Penelope's settled wish, for though Beauchamp Court was to be her warm new Cotswold home, she had wished the morning to be at her late cousin, Mr. Crispin Verney's South Library and dining parlour. Mrs. Carberry had sent up the warm, careful breakfast of the house. Reverend Coverdale had given the grace, and the Stowe parish had been very pleased. If you have stayed with me to the close of this story, I should be glad of one small word from you in the comments below. Tell me the county or the country you are listening from this evening, and one quiet kindness you have lately received that you have not yet had the chance to repay. If this story has been a comfort to your hour, do press the small bell beside the subscribe ribbon at this channel, so that the next Whispers of Love story shall find you in its turn. Until then, be at your ease, and at your candle, and at your hour. Whispers of Love. And on the warm, pale gold Sunday morning of the 10th of September, 1821, in the parish church of St. Edward, at Stowe-on-the-Wold, in the county of Gloucestershire, under the gentle, warm Cotswold autumn sun, the new Marchioness of Stowe-on-the-Wold, Penelope Beauchamp, née Hartshorn, 24, stood at the chancel step as godmother to the girl child of her old reading class pupil, Hetty Tregony, christened Margaret Penelope Tregony, at Reverend Coverdale's hand, with the new Marchioness's name laid down in the parish register in her own gentle italic. The Beauchamp Court chaise stood at the Lich Gate of Stowe for the slow Cotswold Honeystone afternoon home through the lanes that the new Marchioness had walked at her late father's hand at 7 years old, and at her late mother's hand at the same age. Mr. Mainwaring had banked the South Library fire at Beaumont Park. Mrs. Aubrey kept the keys. The wooden Beauchamp doll's house at the Beauchamp Court West Nursery was lately come down for the next Cotswold generation. There are stories that begin with a kiss. There are stories that begin with a vow. There are stories that begin with a knock, and stories that begin with a hired post-chaise, and stories that begin with a will, or a parish ledger, or a curate's letter, or a holograph, signed in a deceased man's own hand. And there are, gentle, longer in the asking, of the most warm, careful patience in the answering, stories that begin with a sealed personal letter from an old man in his 71st year, sealed in gold wax at the South Library writing table at Beaumont Park in the soft Cotswold autumn light, carried up to Lincoln's Inn by his solicitor, and forwarded to a parsonage at Stowe-on-the-Wold by the Cotswold post, opened at a parsonage parlour writing table on the cool, pale yellow Tuesday afternoon of the 30th of November, 1819, by a young pianoforte mistress of 23, who had never known the cousin who had loved her at the long, warm Cotswold distance of the parish post these 23 years past, and which led on, by the warm, careful pace of Mr. Henry Sandys's reading of the will at Lincoln's Inn on the Wednesday morning of the 8th of December, 1819, and the arrival at Beaumont Park on the Sunday afternoon of the 12th of December, and the warm, firm defeat of Sir Bartholomew Quintrell's Chancery proceeding on the Wednesday morning of the 19th of January, 1820, and the warm, careful discovery of Mr. Verney's 27 unsent letters on the Wednesday afternoon of the 22nd of March. The one quiet tear at the 7th birthday letter of 1803, and the warm, gentle introduction at the south porch of St. Edward's on the Easter Sunday morning of the 23rd of April, and the warm, careful proposal at the south parlour rug on the Saturday afternoon of the 5th of August, and the warm, pale gold wedding at St. Edward's on the Saturday morning of the 9th of September, 1820, and the warm, gentle christening of Margaret Penelope Tregony on the Sunday morning of the 10th of September, 1821. To the warm, careful Cotswold home, this gentle italic of the Verney family Bible had kept against the Cotswold weathers of the parish post all these many years past. And so the parson's daughter became the Marchioness of Stow-on-the-Wold. In the gentle, warm Cotswold Honeystone fashion the Verney family Bible had kept, in its careful 17th century italic, at the South Library writing table all the days of its standing.